Lucifer Means Lightbringer presents the mythical astronomy of ice and fire. The Weirwood Compendium, Part 1. The Great King and the Sea Dragon.
Hello, everybody. Hello, and welcome to the new and updated Weirwood Compendium, The Great King and the Sea Dragon. Thanks for joining me, everyone. I am not here by myself, of course. I am joined by two of my very favorite guests of all time, who I will remind to unmute their microphones. We've got Crowfood's daughter and Sanrixian. Crowfood's, aka Amanda, say hello.
Hi, everyone. My name is Amanda. I go by Crowfood's daughter in the forums, and I have a YouTube channel called The Disputed Lands, where I talk about a lot of stuff, mostly Ironborn stuff. So if you're interested in that, go ahead and check that out. And I'm really excited to be here today.
And let us get one more glimpse of that lovely mask that you came in with that we didn't quite catch. Oh, very scary, very, very scary. It's very confusing with your lovely mermaid hair and Skeletor face. But that's the whole thing about zombies, is sometimes they confuse you just a little bit. Like the Night's Queen, supposedly a corpse queen and yet beautiful. So, and then of course we have the one and only Sanrixian, who's already hard at work on a new creation. Sanrixian, say hello.
Hey, what's up, everybody? I am Sanrixian, also known as Mallory Dorn. I do a lot of live streams now with Lucy, and I draw lots of really annoying stuff, and sometimes funny, and sometimes pretty, depending on what you think. And yeah, that's me.
Excellent. And I see we've got George Martin hanging out with, looks like a mermaid, Amanda, aka Amernda, and myself as the hipster Grey King.
Yes.
Excellent.
I have a list.
That is the theme of my costume. It's a little more silver than gray, but close enough. And yes, I know the Grey King wore a driftwood crown, but have you ever tried to put driftwood on your head? It's not very practical. One day, maybe I will create a skillfully balanced and artfully padded driftwood crown, but for now, we're going to have to go with the black iron plastic crown that was worn by some Ironborn kings such as Balin Greyjoy. But we'll get into all that. We do have a ton of stuff to cover. This is the Weirwood Compendium 1. I have revamped it and revised it. And so here's a story of why we're doing this today. Originally, a few weeks ago, as you know, I had some YouTube problems. Turns out there was a false flag trigger on my channel, which just means that some algorithm or something got triggered erroneously, and I was demonetized for a few weeks. And you know, through the grapevine, ding ding ding.
So sorry.
No, it's all right. And so through the grapevine, I realized I had a friend of a friend of a friend who had some pull at YouTube, and they were able to clear it up for me. And so, long story short, I'm remonetized. I'm still not happy with YouTube, of course, because you know, if I hadn't known somebody that knew somebody, I wouldn't have been able to fix it. And other people have had tons of problems. And I don't know if this could reoccur again. And the underlying problem is that there doesn't seem to be like really an appeal system if you get false triggered. And, you know, we all understand we're trying to keep Nazi videos off of YouTube. You know, we're all for that. So we understand if there's some kinks, YouTube, but, you know, should have an appeal system in case you accidentally flag the wrong people. But I'm back online. And I was originally planning on redoing the Green Zombie episodes for the next couple of weeks because I thought that perhaps the problem might be with those episodes. But of course, it turns out there wasn't any problem. So now I'm free. I can do whatever I want. And I had originally planned a few months ago, or at least a couple months ago, to redo this episode at some point because it's really dense and I wrote it a long time ago, and I felt like I could do it a little more clearly. And there's a lot of ideas in here that I want to build on in signs and portals, really heavily, in fact. And so I thought it'd be a good idea to go back and revisit it and revise it, smooth it over. And then Amanda went and dropped this awesome video this week about the Grey King and mermaids. And she's been sort of developing these ideas in her last couple of videos. And I feel like she was really leading up to this one. I know she's got more coming, but she really made some awesome connections in this one with the mermaid wives of so many of these figures, from Hugor Hill to Durn God's Grief to the Grey King. And so, guys, if you haven't seen that, hopefully, I know most of my Starry Wisdom crew has definitely watched this one already. So a lot of you in the chat know this one. But if you haven't seen that one, go over to the Disputed Lands and watch. What's the name of the video officially, Amanda? Don't forget to unmute yourself.
So it's called Ironborn Myth and Legend: The Grey King's Merling Wife. So if you're interested in that, go ahead and check that out.
There you go. And the link will be appearing shortly in the chat if I know my mod witches, and I do know my mod witches. So that one really dovetails nicely. You know, Amanda, this is, you know, Grey King and the Sea Dragon is all about Ironborn mythology. And so, you know, she's often said it's her favorite episode of mine. And she's building on a lot of the ideas in that one in some of her videos. And and of course, there's actually a little bit of a snake eating itself here, because before I ever wrote Grey King and the Sea Dragon, I talked with Amanda about mermaids and Ironborn legend, and she helped me develop a lot of those ideas. So it's actually been a collaboration right from the start, going back more than 3 years on Ironborn mythology between the two of us. So we're going to go back to this one again. And then on Tuesday, we're going to do Amanda's first live stream on her channel. And we are going to basically do kind of a Q&A follow-up to her mermaid video. So think of today's stream and hers on Tuesday as, you know, brother and sister streams, if you will. So what time is it, Amanda, on Tuesday?
So it's going to be at 6 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. my time, Mountain Time, but 6 p.m. Eastern. So on Tuesday, the 28th.
All right, there it is. So with that said, we do have a bit to cover, and I'm up against a hard time limit here some point in the future. So let's go ahead and get roaring. Hey there, friends, fellow mythical astronomers. We spent the entire Bloodstone Compendium talking about Azor Ahai, dragons, moon meteors, Lightbringer, and what you might call fire magic. Of course, in A Song of Ice and Fire, there are really three major powers that be fire magic and dragons, yes, but also ice magic and the others. And of course, the weirwoods and the magic related to the green seers and the skin changers. So if the others are your thing, you'll want to go check out the Moons of Ice and Fire series. But this is, of course, the Weirwood Compendium. And that means it's time to talk about those creepy, bleeding trees with faces and leaves like bloody hands. The great thing is that we don't have to quit Azor Ahai and his moon meteors cold turkey. Oh no. As it happens, the amazing and fairly esoteric mythology of the Ironborn actually serves to unite all that fiery moon meteor, Lightbringer stuff with the green seers and the weirwoods. Hey, Amanda, I think I'm getting a little feedback on your end. Do you have a speaker up by any chance, or you're... No? Okay.
No.
Oh, weird. All right. Sorry, guys. Anyways, the great thing is that we don't have to quit Azor Ahai and his moon meteors cold turkey. No. We would never do that. As it happens, the amazing and fairly esoteric mythology of the Ironborn actually serves to unite all the fiery moon meteor, Lightbringer stuff with the green seers and the weirwoods. That's kind of the magic of this episode. As strange as that sounds, that's actually the best way that I can sum up the symbolic purpose of the Ironborn folklore. It puts the fire into the weirwood tree. That's the overarching framework of this episode. It's a dichotomy of fiery moon meteors and the weirwood trees. As you'll see, these can be considered to be the two forms of the fire of the gods, and that's always what we're reaching for. So harken back, if you will, to Chapter 4 of the Bloodstone Compendium, where we analyzed the trial by combat between Sir Gregor the Mountain versus Oberyn Martell, the Red Viper of Dorne. The highlight of that entire scene, for me at least, was the Gregor eclipse. Gregor the Moon Warrior basically creates an eclipse by standing in between Oberyn and the sun, blocking out the sun. At that moment, Oberyn's oily black sun spear flashes like lightning and finally makes contact with Sir Gregor, punching through his armor to strike him in the arm. We interpreted this in many other arm wounding scenes where lightning is featured as clues about there being a link between the hammer of the waters, which struck the arm of Dorne, and the storm god's thunderbolt, which, thunder and lightning. That connection, of course, would be that they are both really ancient mythical accounts of moon meteor impacts. We talked about how the Norse storm god Thor has a hammer which hurls thunderbolts, and that being a clue for us to link hammers and thunderbolts from the storm god. We also talked about how meteorites were sometimes called thunderstones in the ancient world, and we examined scenes in which dragon attacks from the sky were described as being like thunderbolts. All in all, I think we laid out a pretty good case for the hammer of the waters and the storm god's thunderbolt both being moon meteor impacts. Now, the most important aspect of the Grey King's story, however, is that he stole the fire of the gods and possessed it for mankind, just like Prometheus and Lucifer and Eve and so many others. That's right, it was Eve who first ate the apple, not Adam. Eve should get the credit. Anyways, we have identified this as a major defining theme of the Azor Ahai story, stealing the fire of the gods. And it's certainly got our attention that this idea is prominently featured in the Grey King folklore. The Grey King was actually said to possess divine fire by not one, but two different methods. On one hand, he taunted the storm god into setting a tree ablaze with a thunderbolt, thereby possessing fire for mankind. And he was also said to slay the sea dragon Naga and possess her living fire. Aaron Damphair gives us the quick summary of the sea dragon slaying in A Feast for Crows. Hang on, Amanda. Something's... There you go.
Naga had been the first sea dragon, the mightiest ever to rise from the waves. She fed on krakens and leviathans and drowned whole islands in her wrath. Yet the Grey King had slain her, and the drowned god had changed her bones to stone, so that the men might never cease to wonder at the courage of the first of kings.
And now I've muted myself. All right, so then a bit later we hear about the Grey King's possession of the sea dragon's fire.
The hall had been warmed by Naga's living fire, which the Grey King had made his thrall.
Now, somehow not satisfied with making the living fire of the sea dragon his thrall, the World of Ice and Fire tells us that the Grey King also obtained fire from the storm god's thunderbolt, as I mentioned.
The deeds attributed to the Grey King by the priest and singers of the Iron Islands are many and marvelous. It was the Grey King who brought fire to the earth by taunting the storm god until he lashed down with a thunderbolt, setting a tree ablaze.
According to our theory, both the storm god's thunderbolt and the slain sea dragon are mythicized descriptions of moon meteor impacts. Fire from heaven, in other words. Both legends imply the Grey King as essentially calling down that fire from heaven and then somehow possessing that fire. That kind of sounds a lot like someone else we know, right? Azor Ahai called down the fire from heaven by breaking the moon, and he possessed that fire of the gods by making Lightbringer out of the fiery moon meteors. And it's almost the same story. Furthermore, I suspect that just as Azor Ahai possessed the fire of the gods in the form of black weapons made from moon meteorite ore, the Ironborn may also have quite literally possessed black moon meteor material. Consider this quote from the World of Ice and Fire, which I left you with at the end of Chapter 3 of the Bloodstone Compendium, Waves of Night and Moonblood.
And when battle was joined upon the shores, mighty kings and famous warriors fell before the reavers, like wheat before a scythe, in such numbers that the men of the green lands told each other that the Ironborn were demons risen from some watery hell, protected by fell sorceries and possessed of foul black weapons that drank the very souls of those they slew.
Lightbringer supposedly drank Nissanissa's blood and soul when it slew her, and I've been proposing that Lightbringer was a black steel sword made from a moon meteor from the very start, so it's quite tempting to draw a connection between Azor Ahai's dark Lightbringer sword and these sorcerous, soul-drinking black weapons in the hands of the ancient Ironborn. Lightbringer was the fire of the gods, and I believe it was a black weapon. The Grey King and the Ironborn supposedly possessed the fire of the gods, and they also had these suspicious black weapons. The Ironborn also have that big, mysterious, and you might even say suspicious, sea stone chair carved in the shape of a kraken from an oily black stone. As we examined in The Mountain versus the Viper, there's abundant evidence tying the oily or greasy black stone to moon meteors. I propose that the oily black stone is either moon meteorite material, or more likely earth stone burnt black by the toxic magical fire of the moon meteors. The fact that the Ironborn possess the fire of the gods and a big oily black stone tends to make me wonder if that wasn't the truth of these soul-drinking black weapons, that they were weapons made from oily black stone, the fire of the gods which was pulled down to earth. Perhaps the sea stone chair used to be much larger. Perhaps it used to be a couch before they carved so many swords off of it. And yes, add that to the list, Sanrixian. Sea stone couch. Probably take 5 or 6 krakens, but I'm sure we can do it. So the slaying... Let's actually do a quick check-in with you here, since I haven't so far. What do we got? Oh, nice. The Weirwood submarine is coming along.
I'm filling it out, and if you look closely, you can see little Easter eggs. We haven't...
Okay, not yet. No, keep those. We're going to make them wait. All right.
Haha, you can't see it now.
All live in a
Weirwood submarine. Weirwood submarine.
Yes, singing with lag. I'm sure that's working out great. All right, so the slaying of the sea dragon and the storm god's thunderbolt. 2 myths about moon meteor impacts, right? Well, there are also 2 myths about weirwoods. That's right. For example, the means by which the Grey King took possession of the storm god's fire was the burning tree set ablaze by that divine thunderbolt. But as we mentioned at the end of The Mountain versus the Viper, the Weirwood tree is a symbol of a burning tree. Its 5 pointed red leaves are frequently described as bloody hands, but when Theon sees the rising sun hitting the tops of the trees in the Winterfell Godswood, it says, the red leaves of the Weirwood were a blaze of flame among the green. Together with the screaming face, weeping blood, it's basically the image of a tree person burning alive. Intense, I know. But the point is, when we hear about this special burning tree, which brings the fire of the gods to earth, we should think of the Weirwood tree, which looks like a burning tree. And, well, it can also impart the power of the old gods to man, can't it? Yes, it can. The fire of the gods as a general concept represents the knowledge and the power of the gods, and this is exactly what the Weirwood bond bestows upon the Greenseer. Furthermore, and as we'll see in future Weirwood Compendium episodes, the Yggdrasil Odin mythology behind the Weirwoods and the Greenseers is absolutely saturated with the notion of obtaining the fire, magic, and knowledge of the gods. So, a burning tree that imparts the fire of the gods to man? That's probably a Weirwood tree, especially when we think of the obvious parallel here with the burning bush that spoke to Moses with the voice of God. It burned but was not consumed. The sea dragon myth is also related to Weirwood trees because the arching pillars of pale stone that are known as Naga's ribs, with very large air quotes, are almost certainly made of petrified weirwood. Weirwood trees, once cut down or killed, will turn into pale stone after thousands of years, as we know, and there is abundant evidence that that is exactly what the pale stone ribs of Naga are made of, petrified weirwood. There's a third Grey King myth involving Weirwood, or at least it seems to. This one has him making the first longships of the Ironborn from the hard, pale wood of Ig, a demon tree who fed on human flesh. The name Ig, Y-G-G, is a pretty blatant call out to Yggdrasil, the mythical world tree on which the Weirwood ideas are heavily based. And Weirwoods are pale trees that occasionally receive human sacrifice, feeding on human flesh, if you will. So the clear implication here is that the Grey King was making boats out of weirwood. As it happens, there's a very good theory that we'll talk about today, and which Crowfood's daughter from the Disputed Lands channel has also made a great video about, that the pale stone pillars are actually not only weirwood, but actually the upside down frame of the hull of a large boat made of weirwood. That's right. I mean, the World Book is suggesting the Grey King built ships from weirwood, or more likely ships with at least keels and ribbing made from weirwood. And if one were beached and flipped over, the weirwood portion would indeed turn to stone after thousands of years and might look something like a ribcage. More on this in a moment. So, in our first foray into the stormy world of Ironborn theology, we'll answer the question of why the sea dragon, the storm god's thunderbolts, and the other elements of the Grey King mythology seem to reference both meteors and weirwoods. As strange as it sounds, there is a very logical and clear answer, and it reveals a dramatic truth about Azor Ahai. Perhaps the most important thing I've told you about him since I first told you that he, might not have been such a hero, and that he broke the moon and caused the long night, and that stabbing your wife is in fact bad. But you'll have to wait till the end of the episode for that one. So let's get this Weirwood compendium underway. That's the end of the introductory section, so let's check in with Sandrixian.
Hello,
What's
Sandrixian. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I'm pouring on a little thick today. Sorry, I'll dial it down. The grandiose.
Do it more. I love it. Here is where we're at in the Weirwood submarine. The Weirwood submarine. The Weirwood submarine.
Oh, nice.
I'm taking requests for Easter eggs in the chat if anyone wants to shout them out. And I'm trying to decide who I should be.
So I see an otter. And
oh yes.
A nenny moaning ravenous reader, and patch face upside down looking in. That's great.
Because he's horrifying.
Thank you for improving my crown to a Weirwood crown. I really appreciate that.
Oh, you're so welcome. But you still have your bloodstone necklace.
Thanks.
And a fancy Grey King outfit. And Amanda, is there any type of specific mermaid you'd like to be? Or are you happy with this mermaid and your foam sword down here?
Well, her breasts are much larger than mine, but otherwise she looks good.
Everybody's getting upgraded today, Amanda.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry, as an artist, I have these powers, so.
Yep.
Okay, continue on, sir.
Yes. So I'm actually pulling up my list of wonderful patrons so that I can honor them properly. Back when I first did this episode, I was just starting my Patreon, and so I was only reading like one patron name per section. Now I'm up to like 4 or 5 names per section. All the good people. In fact, excuse me. I will take this moment to give a little shout outs to I've got so my highest patron level is dragon patron, and up until now we've only had one dragon patron, and that was Bronsteres, the wise old dragon who riddles with sphinxes. But in the wake of the YouTube debacle, I had quite the outpouring of support, and that included 2 new dragon patrons, which means that I now have 3 dragons. Motherfucker! And we're still working on the dragon names for the new 2 dragons. So those will be rolling out soon, but 3 Heads has the Patreon dragon. So you two guys.
3 heads.
Yes, you two know who you are. So thank you very much. And let's continue talking and get these dragon names happening. But yeah, thanks to everyone, like I said, who the last month was by far my biggest Patreon month ever for new signups. So thanks so much for everyone. Completely washed out the bad taste of the YouTube crap and then some. So I've got new wind beneath my wings, and I'm very fired up. So I am in the middle of the move. What's that now?
It's between your wings.
Oh, between my wings. That's right.
Now.
That's right. I forgot. I tongue-tied myself on that one. So let me get ready for the flamenco guitar. Not doing a good job of hurrying so far. That's okay. Yes, when you're searching for John Walsh's YouTube channel, it's always important to put the guitar in there, or else you'll just get America's Most Wanted. And by the way, if you like the flamenco guitar that's on my episodes, that is all from John Walsh. He has a bunch of original music and him playing the classics on the John Walsh YouTube channel. So if you ever want some flamenco music, just dial in John Walsh guitar into the YouTube machine, and entertain your loved one and have a romantic dinner. Not yet. Not yet. Hold on, Mr. Walsh. Hold on. There we go. Unmute that. Bring up the Patreon names. Thanks for bearing with me, guys. How are we on attendance here? Let's check in. Oh, 120 viewers. Thanks, everybody. Even for the reruns. Coming out for the reruns. You guys must love me. In all seriousness, you guys who have listened to all of my episodes and are re-listening to this, when we go through the rest of this episode, you're going to see all kinds of stuff that I didn't point out because I didn't know it at this time that we've covered since then. So this episode is really a trip to go back over. You've reread it a couple times, haven't you, Amanda?
I have read it at least 3 times. It is by far my favorite episode / essay of yours. And this essay is actually what brought me back to the fandom. We've talked in the past about how I took a break, and I did, but this is the essay that brought me back because a veil was literally lifted from my eyes when I read it. And that passion was just, that fire was there again, and I was back. So,
well, you're making me blush over here. Thank you. I'm certainly glad to have brought you out of retirement. That is for sure. And like I said, it's really just, kind of the culmination of all of our conversations about all that stuff. So, yeah. And by the way, I think you could send in super chats. I'm not sure if I have to go back in and actually turn it on. You guys tell me, is the little $sign next to the chat? If it is not, then I might need to go and actually turn them back on. But of course, you can use paypal.me/mythicalastronomy. And I get notifications on my phone when you do that. So I will know right away and shout you out if you don't do it. I don't see it. Nope, it's not on. Okay, no worries. YouTube takes 25% of super chats anyway. So if you want to support Mythical Astronomy with a one-time donation, you can do paypal.me/mythicalastronomy. You actually don't need to have a PayPal account. It's just a payment link, and you can drop a little change in there. And then I can shout you out. Like I said, my phone will give me a little doodle-doo, and I will shout you out. And then you can drop a question in the chat if you want. I am going to put this on vibrate, though. So with that said, I've got some Patreon names queued up, and let's play some flamenco guitar. This next section goes out to The Long Night's Watch, Gustav, Sharon Ice Eyes, Dread Ferryman of the North, wielder of the staff of the old gods, a weirwood staff banded in the living steel, Synxia, frozen fire queen of the summer snows and burner of winter's wick, Antonius the conspirator, the red right hand of the Lord, knower of the unknowable, dispenser of final justice, and Blue Raven of the Lightning, the frozen thunderbolt, whose words are, the way must be trod. There we go. That was the best sort of fade out I could do with the YouTube slider there. How did that sound, guys? That sound all right?
Little loud on the flamenco, buddy.
Oh, okay, cool. Was it like really loud? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Politely.
I can fix that. It's live, people. It's live, so I'll just turn that input down a little. Okay, we'll see. Did you hear the names at all, or?
yes, I heard them.
Okay, as long as
a little loud though.
It was intense, but as long as the people got credits, that's the important thing. Okie dokie doke. Feeling very live right now. All right, the next section is called The Sea Dragon. The first thing I need to do is to convince you that the Sea Dragon is in fact an account of a moon meteor impact. We've already talked about the Thunderbolt a bit in the Mountain versus the Viper essay, and we'll certainly come back to it, as well as the idea of burning trees. But we've been mentioning the Sea Dragon in passing all throughout the Bloodstone Compendium, and I haven't really given you my full body of reasoning and evidence for the Sea Dragon being a moon meteor. So let's start with that. It begins with very basic logic. If the mythical idea of dragons coming from the moon really refers to falling meteors, then a sea dragon is probably nothing more than a dragon meteor which fell into the sea. We've seen that the Chinese have been keeping track of comets for thousands of years, and they also have a history of depicting comets and falling meteors as fire-breathing dragons. But not just any old fire-breathing dragons. The Chinese dragons are almost always water dragons and sea serpents. This is almost certainly the result of the Chinese having dealt with tsunamis brought on by the landing of dragons in the Pacific Ocean for all of their history. The sea dragon Naga was noted to, quote, drown whole islands in its wrath, and this would be an excellent description of the enormous tsunamis, which would indeed accompany the oceanic impact of a fair-sized meteor. The Hammer of the Waters, another likely moon meteor impact story, also involves drowning a lot of land, the formerly whole and now broken arm of Dorne. I mentioned that Thor's lightning hammer suggests a connection between the storm god's thunderbolt and the Hammer of the Waters, and the drowning of land involved in both tales sounds very similar. As we examine the sea dragon ideas here, watch out for hammers and hammering waves, because when George references one moon meteor symbol, he usually finds a way to reference the other ones as well. We're going to see a lot of that today. Oh, yes. Amanda, can you actually just go ahead and mute your mic when in between your speaking parts? I'm still getting a little bit of something there. Okay, cool. All right, so by tracing out the moonblood symbolic motif in past episodes, we've seen that floods are a major part of the fallout of the Long Night moon explosion disaster. George is doing a pretty clever, if slightly uncouth, wordplay thing by using the phrase moonblood as a reference to the real floods of the Long Night that would have been triggered by the meteor impacts, as well as to the meteors themselves. Remember that meteors can be called bleeding stars, so a storm of bleeding stars flooding the sky is very much like a tide of blood coming from the moon. As always, it's a symbolic meaning piggybacking on a literal meaning. We've got a metaphorical flood of bleeding stars that causes literal floods when they land near or in the water. As we know, our earthly moon is the cause of the ocean tides. But this idea takes it to a whole new level. We have moon meteors causing titanic flood tides. Yes, that's a Titanic joke. Floods and boats. Anyways, to get a bit more scientific, a planet with multiple moons, excuse me. To get a bit more scientific, a planet with multiple moons that lost even one of them, even a small moon, would have some pretty serious issues with irregular tides, to put it mildly. Scientists, please correct me if I'm wrong, but the moon meteors wouldn't actually even have to hit the ocean to cause flooding. Regardless, the Ironborn legends aren't just about a flood, but a great fiery thing, thunderbolt, falling from the sky. So it seems like someone around here actually did see something fall from the sky. Now, turning from science to pseudoscience, which is bad for people but good for folklore, consider also that in ancient times the moon was, wrongly, believed to trigger a woman's menstruation cycle, which is why menstrual blood is referred to as moon blood sometimes. Martin is imagining a moon goddess dying in meteor childbirth and causing floods. So, what better phrase to use than moon blood? It captures the sacrificial aspect of Lightbringer's forging as well as the reproductive aspect. And we know that both of those are very important parts of the Lightbringer myth. It's also a call out to the tale of Mithras and his slaying of the white lunar bull, whose blood flowed out over the entire world and transformed it. That's right, he slew the moon bull and the world was flooded with moon bull blood. A moon bull blood flood, as Dr. Seuss would say. The likely truth here is fairly simple. A moon meteor probably impacted on or near the Iron Islands, drowning the land and probably collapsing some of the land too, such as the area around Castle Pike. The first Theon chapter of A Clash of Kings, which is our introduction to the Iron Islands, is some of the most vivid examples of, or at least I should say, it is one of the most vivid examples of mythical astronomy in the entire series. And in fact, it's not the first chapter. So let me just redo that whole sentence. The second Theon chapter of A Clash of Kings, our introduction to the Iron Islands, is actually some of the most vivid example of, oh man, You know, when you do the typo in the first one, it's hard to read it properly. But one more time. The second Theon chapter of A Clash of Kings, a great chapter, if there ever was one, serves as our introduction to the Iron Islands, and it's one of the most vivid examples of mythical astronomy in the entire series, as it tells the tale in fairly clear language, and all while the red comet hangs in the sky above the castle in typical menacing fashion.
The point of land on which the Greyjoys had raised their fortress had once thrust like a sword into the bowels of the ocean, but the waves had hammered at it day and night until the land broke and shattered. Thousands of years passed. All that remained were 3 bare and barren islands and a dozen towering stacks of rock that rose from the water like the pillars of some sea god's temple, while the angry waves foamed and crashed among them.
Castle Pike is part of a point of land which thrust into the bowels of the ocean like a sword, and then broke. We took a long look at broken swords in the Tyrion Targaryen essay, and we saw that the broken sword is an important symbol which refers to the splitting of the Lightbringer comet and to a long list of Azor Ahai last hero figures with broken swords, including the last hero himself. Here in this quote, we read about a broken sword which was thrust into the bowels of the ocean thousands of years in the past. That would be our island-drowning sea dragon, thrusting into the ocean like a sword at the place where the waves hammer the land. Oh, hammer. The Castle Pike itself seems to be actually a part of the broken sword land, as is noted several times in the chapter. And in the very next paragraph to the one we just read, we see that the sea tower at the point of the broken sword peninsula sounds an awful lot like Lightbringer.
The sea tower rose from the outmost island at the point of the broken sword, the oldest part of the castle, round and tall. The sheer-sided pillar on which it stood, half-eaten, through by the endless battering of the waves. The base of the tower was white from centuries of salt spray, the upper stories green from the lichen that crawled over it like a thick blanket, the jagged crown black with soot from its nightly watchfire.
A jagged black crown, which lights on fire at night, you don't say. Remember that the golden crown, worn by kings, was originally meant as a depiction of the sun's rays, which signifies that the king has the divine authority of the sun god. A black crown inverts this symbolism and implies a dark sun, or perhaps a solar king who has taken his divine authority through force. Through usurpation, you might even say. The Ironborn kings sometimes wear a black crown, such as Balin Greyjoy speaks of, and of course there are a lot of black crowns in A Song of Ice and Fire, and I believe that they all refer to the idea of a darkened sun or an illegitimate sun king, the two things that basically define Azor Ahai, at least if he is the Bloodstone Emperor, as I have speculated. Thus, for the black tower at the tip of the broken sword to have a flaming black crown that lights on fire, I guess that's redundant, flaming, lighting on fire. In any case, let's just say that that is our man, or our sword, perhaps. Salt and smoke are here too. The soot which darkens the top of the tower, and the salt which turns the base of it white. I'll also quickly point out that the colors of the tower, white, green, and black, mirror the colors of Dany's dragons. Only 2 paragraphs later, the red comet itself, infamous symbol of Lightbringer, makes an appearance to clue us in to just what kind of dragon sword falls into the sea.
Theon had never seen a more stirring sight. In the sky behind the castle, the fine red tail of the comet was visible through thin, scuttling clouds. All the way from River Run to Seaguard, the Malisters had argued about its meaning. It is my comet, Theon told himself, sliding a hand into his fur-lined cloak to touch the oilskin pouch snug in his pocket. Inside was the letter Robb Stark had given him. Paper was as good as a crown.
So we have a castle with a very Lightbringer-like tower that sits on a point of land which thrusts into the bowels of the sea like a long sword or a sea dragon. And right behind it, like a red flag calling our attention to all of this, we have the red comet, Lightbringer symbol par excellence. Theon has a crown too. One second. Theon has a crown too, the parchment from Rob that was, quote, as good as a crown. It ends up mirroring the black fiery crown of the Sea Tower when Balin casually tosses it into the fire upon receiving it later in the chapter. It said that the parchment crown curled, blackened, and took flame, a good match to the curved sea dragon tower with its black crown of flame. Before it's burnt, we see that Theon's paper crown is kept in an oilskin pouch, perhaps to symbolize the oily black stone of the Lightbringer comet and the moon meteors. Theon is fingering the paper crown in the oilskin pouch as he looks up and thinks that the comet belongs to him. And yes, all the wording in that last sentence was intentional. In other words, the symbolism here paints Theon as a man with a flaming black crown to whom the Lightbringer comet belongs. We know who that is, right? There's actually one other Ironborn story about how they came to possess fire, and it actually leads us right back to the conclusion that this fire that we are talking about was Lightbringer. This is also from A Clash of Kings and begins with Aaron Dampere speaking to Theon.
Every morning brings a new day, much like the old. In River Run, they would tell you different. They say the red comet is a herald of a new age, a messenger from the gods. A sign it is, the priests agreed, but from our God, not theirs. A burning brand it is, such as our people carried of old. It is the flame the drowned God brought from the sea, and it proclaims a rising tide. It is time to hoist our sails and go forth into the world with fire and sword, as he did.
The red comet is like a burning brand and proclaims a rising tide, which in retrospect is pretty straightforward. The red comet equals a time for floods. That'll be book 8, A Time for Floods. It also proclaims the time to go out with fire and sword, or perhaps with a fiery sword. It's interesting that the drowned god brought this fiery brand from the ocean. How did fire get in the ocean, I wonder? Well, we think we know the answer. A fiery and wrathful sea dragon comet sword was thrust into the bowels of the ocean, shattering the land. The red comet is directly compared to the burning brand that the drowned god brings from the sea. So it seems that we are to imagine a god emerging from the waves, wielding the red comet as a fiery sword. This lines up well with what the Ironborn say about themselves and their origins. The Iron Islands are named for their people, who are like iron, and that the Ironborn themselves came from the sea. Iron people that emerge from the sea with burning brands, who will go forth with fire and sword, in other words. As we'll begin to see, bringing fire out of the sea is an important aspect of the Ironborn mythos, starting here with the tale of the drowned god carrying the burning brand from the sea. As for that burning brand as a symbol, Aaron directly compares it to the red comet, but there's actually another famous scene where the burning brand is also used to symbolize the fallen star fire that is Lightbringer. This is from a Jon chapter of A Clash of Kings, as Jon and Stone Snake prepare to climb up the pass in the Frostfangs.
They could see the fire in the night, glimmering against the side of the mountain like a fallen star. It burned redder than the other stars and did not twinkle, though sometimes it flared up bright and sometimes dwindled down to no more than a distant spark, dull and faint. The wolf will remain with us, Corin said. White fur is seen too easily by moonlight. He turned to Stone Snake. When it's done, throw down a burning brand. We'll come when we see it fall.
There we go. Okay, so a stone snake will throw down a burning brand when he climbs high enough to reach the red, flaring, bright star, fallen star fire suspended in the night. Yes, that makes sense to me. So taking a look at the major events of this chapter in a little more detail, what we see is a stone snake, the comet, colliding with a red star fire, the fire moon. Blood is spilled, 3 people at the fire, perhaps for the 3 dragon meteors. And then Azor High Reborn symbol Jon Snow does a Lightbringer forging scene with Kissed by Fire Moon Maiden Ygritte. And then the burning brand is thrown down to the earth below. That burning brand symbolizes the dragon meteors which fell from the moon, one of which became the sea dragon meteor, which was thrust into the bowels of the sea at the Iron Islands. Thus we see that the story of the drowned god carrying the burning brand out of the sea is basically the same story as the Grey King possessing the fire of the sea dragon. That burning brand and the sea dragon's fire represent moon meteors that fell into the ocean and are then brought out of the sea by either the Grey King or the drowned god. Even better, one of the wildlings in the Frostfangs that Jon fights against actually uses a burning brand as a weapon right before they throw down the burning brand from the cliff, which draws a very nice connection between the burning brand symbol and the idea of a fiery weapon that comes from a fallen red star. There you go. And who is this drowned god anyway, who carries fire from the ocean? Remembering that the moon is a goddess, the woman wife of the sun, the pieces of the moon which drowned in the ocean as sea dragons would be pieces of the drowned moon goddess. In other words, what we really have here with the sea dragon is a drowned goddess, not a drowned god. Although, of course, moons are really rocks and aren't particularly gender-oriented. It's just a convention of mythology, but it's fun to say. Drowned goddess, there you go. I'd also like to point out that burning brands, such as the drowned god carried from the sea, are burning wood. And of course, a burning tree represents the fire of the gods in the other myth of the Grey King, the one with the storm god's thunderbolt. The burning brand is therefore connected to the fire of the gods concept in 3 ways. It's burning wood, like the Grey King's burning tree. It's directly compared to the red comet by Aaron Dampere, and it is the form of fire which the drowned god carried from the sea, which makes it the fire of the sea god. You'll recall that the pillars of the broken sword point of land on which Pike sits are described as the pillars of a sea god's temple. Putting it all together, what we have is a series of mythical metaphors, both in the main text of the story and in Ironborn folklore, which seem to be describing a meteor plunging into the ocean near the Iron Islands at the time of the Long Night and causing deadly floods. And lo and behold, all throughout those paragraphs that we quoted, from Theon's arrival at Castle Pike, we have a ton of references to island drowning waves, as well as a hammering to call to mind. We have a ton of references to island drowning waves, as well as hammering to call to mind the hammer of the waters. We've seen it said of the broken sword of land that the waves had hammered at it day and night until the land broke and shattered thousands of years past, and that the angry waves foamed and crashed among the remaining pieces of the peninsula, which are like the pillars of some sea god's temple. We saw that the sheer-sided pillar on which the sea dragon tower stood was half eaten through by the endless battering of the waves. There's more I could quote, but you get the idea. So could these angry waves that did so much damage in the ancient past be the ones generated by the sea dragon's fall from the heavens? That's what I'm proposing. The same event which was remembered as the hammer of the waters, breaking the land and drowning islands. Again, that's what I'm proposing. So let's listen to Aaron Dampere from A Feast for Crows.
Outside, beneath the snoring of his drowned men and the keening of the wind, he could hear the pounding of the waves, the hammer of his god calling him to battle.
The same waves which hammered the land of Pike are described here as God's hammer. I would say that the sea dragon, a fallen moon goddess, was itself the hammer which broke the land and brought the drowning waves. This is a delightful parallel to the hammer of the waters drowning and breaking the land of the Arm of Dorn. At the same time, the sea dragon meteor hammer is also the storm god's thunderbolt, which lines up well with Thor being a storm god who hurls thunderbolts from his hammer. Again, we're left with the idea that the hammer of the waters, the island drowning sea dragon, and the storm god's thunderbolt are all the same thing. My favorite thing, moon meteors. Ah, yes. So let me say this. Although the hammer of the waters seems to refer to an impact on the Arm of Dorn, and the sea dragon and the thunderbolt myth seem to refer to an impact on or near the Iron Islands, both meteors would be from the same moon explosion. And therefore, George has chosen to weave all the moon meteor symbols together in these various scenes. Thus, the Ironborn myths also have a ton of hammer references, and Hammer of the Water scenes also have dragons and spears and lightning and so forth. A great example of this kind of parallel between different meteor myths are the waves of night and blood that appear to crash onto the steely shores of Oathkeeper and Widow's Wail, and their parallels to the scene at Pike. Pike sits on a point of land which is like a broken sword, one which was washed over by the moonblood flood of the sea dragon. And in similar fashion, Ned's split or broken swords have waves of blood washing over their steel. The bloody sea dragon flood came during the long night, and Ned's swords have waves of night to symbolize the long night. In turn, Aaron sees pounding and crashing waves as the hammer of his god, creating the image of a divine hammer pounding the steel of the broken sword peninsula at the Iron Islands like a smith at his forge. That broken sword of land thrusts into the ocean, and thrusting swords into the ocean is, of course, how you get hammering sea dragon waves, the waves of Moonblood, which come in the long night and which are alluded to in the folds of Widow's Wail and Oathkeeper. And then back before Ned's ice was split and reforged, we saw it being dipped into the, quote, night black waters of the pond in the Winterfell Godswood, while still bloody from the execution which began a Game of Thrones, creating very miniature waves of night and blood. So the idea of God's hammer being the one to smash the Iron Islands is actually reinforced all through this chapter via references to Robert Baratheon's attack on Pike during the Greyjoy Rebellion, about 9 years before the beginning of the story. As I mentioned before, King Robert and his hammer are a rather clear manifestation of Thor and his mighty hammer, Mjolnir, and the entire Robert's entire attack on the Iron Islands is basically replaying the Storm God's Thunderbolt strike, the Sea Dragon landing, and the Hammer of the Waters all at the same time.
It was nigh on sunset when they reached the walls of Pike, a crescent of dark stone that ran from cliff to cliff, with the gatehouse in the center and 3 square towers to either side. Theon could still make out the scars left by the stones of Robert Baratheon's catapults. A new south tower had risen from the ruins of the old, its stone a paler shade of gray, and as yet unmarred by passions of lichen. That was where Robert had made his breach, swarming in over the rubble and corpses with his warhammer in hand, and Ned Stark at his side. Theon had watched from the safety of the sea tower, and sometimes he still saw the torches in his dreams and heard the thunder of the collapse.
You're muted, Elmo.
Alrighty then, Pike's Walls of Darkstone.
I got it.
Pike's Walls of Darkstone are called a crescent, which puts us in mind of the lunar crescent that was broken to create the Sea Dragon meteor, as well as all the related sickle, curving knife, crescent moon symbolism. King Robert, hurled stones at this crescent, then came through with his warhammer. Theon's reference to thunder gives us the thunderbolt idea to go along with the Storm King Robert's hammer, so it's all there. Continuing the pattern of weaving hammer ideas in with flaming sword ideas, we find that there was actually a flaming sword on the scene at the Battle of Pike as well. Like I said, the gang is all invited. This is Gendry talking to Arya in a storm of swords.
He liked feasts and tourneys. That's why Robert was so fond of him. And this Thoros was brave. When the walls of Pike crashed down, he was the first man through the breach. He fought with one of his flaming swords, setting Ironmen on fire with every slash. I wish I had a flaming sword. I can think of a few people I'd like to set on fire.
I love that line. Such a great line. The Ironborn were set on fire here by a flaming sword, the one which crashed through the breach in the Crescent of Dark Stone, along with a thunderous hammer. That would be our Sea Dragon meteor, quote, giving fire to the Ironborn, if you will, just as the Grey King was said to possess the Sea Dragon's fire. Setting the Ironborn on fire serves as a nice metaphor for giving them possession of fire. In this case, the fire of a flaming sword, which is in service to Storm King Robert Baratheon. The flaming sword also parallels the Storm God's Thunderbolt, which gave the Grey King fire, of course, as it gives fire, quote unquote, to the Ironborn here. Moving away from that Theon chapter of Clash, we find more confirmation that the idea of hammering waves. Sorry, let me just do that. In fact, let me back up like 2 sentences here. I mangled the last one too. Always sits in my craw when I do that. Setting the Ironborn on fire serves as a nice metaphor for giving them fire. In this case, the fire of a flaming sword in service to the Storm King Robert Baratheon. So moving away from that Theon chapter of Clash, we find more confirmation that the idea of hammering waves can be connected to the sea dragon, when Aeron prays to the drowned god in A Feast for Crows. And Amanda, I do actually have to read this one, so. My God, he prayed, speak to me in the rumble of the waves and tell me what to do. The captains and the kings await your word. Who shall be our king in Balin's place? Sing to me in the language of Leviathan, that I may know his name. Tell me, O Lord beneath the waves, who has the strength to fight the storm on Pike? All right. I would give that one like a 6. Not really my best voice, but it's something. Anyways, the word Leviathan has a couple of meanings. It can refer to any large sea creature, particularly whales, and sometimes it can refer to large people when they are derisively called Leviathans. Sam is called a gray Leviathan by lazy Leo Tyrell, for example, while Yezin, the Yunkish slave master, is called a yellow Leviathan. But Leviathan is actually a well-known mythological sea creature, of course, with a very specific description. It's a monstrous, multi-headed sea dragon. That's right, we're talking about a multi-headed, fire-breathing dragon which lives in the ocean, a real sea dragon. So when Aeron is praying for the drowned god to speak to him through the waves in the language of Leviathan, it's simply another clue that the drowned god is actually the island-drowning sea dragon, the Leviathan, and that the hammering waves come from the sea dragon. The language of the sea dragon, in other words, is the flood, the one which hammers and drowns the land. Time for some vitamin water. And also a Sandreed check-in. Sorry, Sandreed, my sections are a little long today, so I might have to stop periodically and check in with you. Are we still working on Weirwood Submarine here?
Oh yes, I was talking about talking to the chat real quick about what else to cram in here. There's a lot. We've got a Cthulhu plushie, which I think Visaria asked for. That's definitely not Fire of the Gods in there. And here's me as the pilot / Ringo Starr. This is my favorite part so far, a Squisher dragging Dick Crab through the ocean. Obligatory merman and a Naga. And I went ahead and made the weird things on top of the traditional, Beatles yellow submarine art. Anemones. I can't say that word. Help me out. And
well, that's the whole point of calling them anemones, is because nobody can say anemone, right?
Yeah, that is the most true thing you've said so far today, right now.
That's fair.
And here you go. Obligatory moon meters.
Is that a sea dragon?
Yes.
Can I have like a merman tail, or I look like I just cut off at the waist there?
Well, I was going to give you space pants, but I didn't know.
Yeah. No, that works.
It's going to be a space merman tail.
Yeah. Excuse me, do you have any space pants for mermen? Because I need a $40,000 gallon freshwater tank. Do you have a bathroom for dolphins?
Do you have a bathroom for dolphins? I'm actually trans dolphin.
All right.
Thank you.
It's actually kind of
that South Park reference.
More humor. South Park, of course, not very woke, but still funny, even though it's appropriate. Anyways, inappropriate rather. All right, so let's go back to the essay here, and yes. So while we're defining words that mean sea monster, we should briefly talk about the name which George gave the sea dragon, Naga. Although the word Naga has sort of become a common word for snake in many universes, it's actually a very specific word. Naga is the Vedic Sanskrit word for cobra, and the same word is used to refer to a specific type of deity or being which incarnates as a great snake, usually a king cobra, which is native to India, although it can sometimes be other snakes. In the Mahabharata, Nagas are beings with both human-like and snake-like attributes. The myth of the Naga evolved as it traveled from India and sees other forms in nearby mythology, most of which shows various forms of the snake man idea. In Hindu myth, they are more like nature spirits, which can bring fertility or sometimes floods and storms. And most notably, they are said to possess the elixir of immortality, fire of the gods, in other words. In Buddhist mythology, Naga became merged with the myths of wise dragons. Shout out to Bronsteres, the wise old dragon, and dragon men, and is frequently depicted as a man with multiple snake or dragon heads above him, just as a multi-headed dragon or snake. The emphasis here is on a transcendent being who's gained the knowledge of heaven and attained enlightenment, which they specifically associated with a dragon's fire. There are versions of Naga in Laos, Thailand, Java, and Indonesia, and many of those are associated with lakes or rivers or oceans, but my favorite has got to be the Cambodian idea of Nagas. They were thought to be a reptilian race of beings under the king Kalia, who possessed a large empire or kingdom in the Pacific Ocean region until they were chased away to India by the Garuda, a phoenix-like incarnation of Lord Vishnu. The daughter of these lizard people married a Brahmin from India, and from their union sprang the Cambodian people. Thus, the Cambodian people have a saying which means born from Naga, kind of like the blood of the dragon, blood of the Naga. So if we were to sum up the body of ideas which George may be implying by naming his sea dragon Naga, we would include beings who are both snake and man, or even dragon and man, multi-headed snakes or dragons, beings who possess magic and the knowledge and fire of the gods, and frequent associations with water. I think it's easy to see how these ideas are generally in sync with George's own dragon mythology, which encourages us to draw a link between the sea dragon ideas and the rest of George's dragon lore. Azor Ahai, the three-headed dragon, people that are the blood of the dragon, and so on. Next, I'd like to turn our attention to the Leviathan, whose voice Aaron was seeking in the hammering of the waves, and also to the broader real-world phenomena of dragon slayer myths, where the slaying of the dragon results in a transformational global flood. And that's the end of our section. How am I doing, Amanda?
Doing really good.
Okay, cool. My voice feels pretty good today. Feels solid. Sanri, what have we done here to the submarine?
I'm crafting Jinx in here, playing a xylophone made from the bones of Naga. I was going to ask her if she wanted her wig or not.
That's awesome.
But, you know, she looks so good bald. It's incredible. Only like two people can pull that off. Her and Natalie Portman.
Well, and of course, Sigourney Weaver. Come on now.
Oh, well, yeah, duh. Excuse me.
Yeah. All right. So let me find us some new patron names to read. Oh, yes, there's some right here. All right, hopefully this music won't be quite as extremely loud this time. The language of Leviathan. This section is brought to you by Visenya Ice Eyes, starry jewel queen of the frozen Vale of Tears and member of the Long Night's Watch. By Sir Brian the Prodigal Stark, the good other, knight of the Last House, wielder of the Valyrian steel blade, Red Song, and member of the Long Night's Watch. And Sir Imriel Jourdain of the Tour, spinner of the Great Wheel and guardian of the Sword of the Morning. And also Sir Harrison of House Casterly, the Noontide Sun, whose words are deeper than ever did plummet sound, guardian of the Celestial Shadowcat. There we go, for an even 4. Oh, the music was muted that time. You didn't hear flamenco. Just me, huh? Shoot, I'm going to do that again. I'm going to do it again. Yeah, man.
One more time.
That's not right. This section is called The Language of Leviathan. And it is brought to you by Visenya Ice Eyes, starry jewel queen of the frozen Vale of Tears, and Sir Brian the Prodigal Stark, the good other, knight of the Last House, wielder of the Valyrian steel blade Red Song, 2 members of the Long Night's Watch. And also by Sir Imriel Jourdain of the Tour, spinner of the Great Wheel and guardian of the Sword of the Morning, as well as Sir Harrison of House Casterly, the Noontide Sun, whose words are deeper than ever did plummet sound, guardian of the Shadowcat. All right, was that better? Yes, better music?
Yes,
You're both
maybe just
muted. Okay.
a little tiny bit down, teeny bit down, but it's pretty perfect.
Okay. It's still kind of loud, huh? All right. Well, I'm doing what I can.
One click down and you'll be good.
Okay. Cool. 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 Blasting you with the. Oh my goodness. The chat is on fire for your drawing right now. Thanks for keeping him busy while I do the reruns here. I appreciate that, Sanri.
It's my jab.
Yeah. This is looking good though. Jinx with the bone xylophone. The xylobone.
The xylobone phone made out of Naga's bones.
Nice.
I'm not going to be able to get all of her tattoos right.
That's okay. We know they're there. They're off screen. Got to have a little bit off screen. So Leviathan is a Hebrew word that means twisted, coiled, or that which gathers itself into folds, referencing the way that snakes coil up and fold in on themselves. The biblical sea dragon Leviathan was probably based on similar older ideas in the same region, specifically that of ocean of chaos dragons Tiamat and Lotan, or his Greek incarnations Ladon and the Hydra, all of which were slaughtered to effect some kind of creative process on the world, usually accompanied by floods and storms. The legend of the island drowning sea dragon Naga and its associations with the fallen moon maiden myth that we've been tracing out in all the previous episodes could fit right in with this mythological family, and indeed it does, which includes a long line of myths about dragon slaying and world transforming cataclysms, and thus I think it's appropriate to view in that context. And if I may say so, I think this is one of the things that really helps my moon meteor theory sort of snap into place. The first time you hear about it, it seems a little bit weird, and then you realize, oh, well, there is moon disasters in the backstory of Dune, and also in the cartoon, which I can't think of. Oh, God, why can't I think of? Thundar the Barbarian, yes. And then you go into mythology, and you find that the idea of slaying big sea dragons and slaying moons leads to floods and cataclysms, and you realize that what George is talking about here is actually, it's right in line with all that stuff. So, as for the biblical Leviathan, a true sea dragon, we read that in the beginning, Yahweh, who was originally a storm god akin to the Canaanite Yam, created two Leviathans, but he killed the female and neutered the male. Since we have one moon, which gave birth to dragons as it died, and one moon that still survives, which is connected to the others who are infertile, it is tempted to draw a correlation here, or several correlations. Many of these types of myths have one big dragon slaying in the past, and one big one prophesied yet to come. That's kind of the pattern. And that is exactly like the Carthene moon dragon myth, which speaks of a second moon that perished in the past and a surviving moon that will crack in the future. And of course, those of you who have listened to Moons of Ice and Fire and the Blood of the Other series know that there is a ton of foreshadowing about the remaining moon, giving us a hashtag Ice Moon Apocalypse. So check that out if you haven't seen that. And I'll also go ahead and pop in a screen share here for one of my absolute favorite images. Application window, D. This is The Destruction of Leviathan, an 1875 engraving by Gustave Doré. And is that, are we getting that? Oh, hang on. Here it is. Let's scroll up a tiny bit so you can see it. That is damn cool. So you see Yahweh's got a sword, slaying a sea dragon. And yeah, I know you love this image, Amanda.
I love it too. He's an incredible, incredible artist.
Amanda was muted, but I could see her mouthing, I do. So, all right. So back to the script. Even more interesting is the association with the skin of the Leviathan and light bringing. Yahweh made clothes of light from the skin of the slain female Leviathan. That's a very close match to making Lightbringer from the moon meteors, of course. And it also reminds us of the Great King making a long haul from the skeleton of the sea dragon. Supposedly, Yahweh will make an illuminating cover for the entire sky out of the skin of the male Leviathan at the end times, showing us the dragon slaying yet to come idea. Now, George seems to be referencing these ideas, but of course, inverting certain aspects, as he is wont to do. Darkness covers the sky when the sea dragon was slain instead of light, unless you're counting the momentary flash and explosion of light, which was then followed by the darkness. I guess that works. And the body of the slain sea dragon seems to drink the light instead of giving it off, as the biblical Leviathan skin does. Of course, we could also have black moon meteors that get set on fire. So they're both drinking the light and giving the light, because George likes paradoxes. Yay, paradoxes. Returning to the idea of a Leviathan or a sea dragon being slaughtered to effect some huge transformation on the world, let's take another look at Persian and Vedic mythology. We've seen that much of the Lightbringer mythology comes from Persian Zoroastrianism as well as Roman Mithraism, which itself may be partially based on Persian ideas of Mithra, although there is a lot of debate about that. The loose translation of Azor-Ahai as fire dragon, which I've offered before, derives from Avestan, which is an older dialect of Persian, and Vedic Sanskrit phonetic roots. And here let's go ahead and clarify what was a bit of an oversimplification from my very first essay. The Middle Persian word for fire is adur, A-D-U-R, while the Avestan form is atar, A-T-A-R. And the modern version of the word is azar, A-Z-A-R. That's where we get the similarity between Azor and fire. Meanwhile, Azi, A-Z-I, is the Avestan word for serpent or dragon. For example, in Zoroastrian myth, there's an evil three-headed dragon, or perhaps a dragon man, the tales are not clear, named Azi Dahaka, or sometimes Azdaha, who is chained up but is prophesied to burst his bonds at the end of the world and ravage the earth, Lion of Night or Lucifer style. There's another dragon that was apparently in need of slaying called Azi Shuara, the poisonous horned dragon. And again, Azi, Azi is a cognate to the Vedic Sanskrit word ahi, which also means snake and sometimes dragon. So the name of the big bad serpent dragon villain of the Rig Veda is usually called Varitra, but it's also called Ahi, and he's a snake who has to be slaughtered by the hero Indra, an act which unleashes a global flood. Of course, the Rig Veda also speaks of the dragon of the deep called Ahi Bandnaya, who is said to dwell at the bottom of the heavenly rivers. And that's a great cosmic sea of space, river of stars, sea of stars, as above, so below kind of symbolism going on there, as I'm sure you realize. So to sum up our loose translation of Azor-Ahai, Azor is similar to the old Persian and Iranian words for fire, and Ahai is very similar to the Vedic Sanskrit word Ahi, which means dragon or snake. The Avestan form of Ahi is Azi, which reminds us a bit of the AZ in Azor. So it's pretty fiery and dragony. And then we have the fire dragon Gochir, who comes to us from the Zoroastrian and Manichaean astrology. Manichaeanism was a highly dualistic religion that sprang up in Persia around 200 AD, which was in part based on the very creepy Book of Enoch. And it has much in common with early Christian Gnosticism and later Gnostic beliefs of the Cathars of southern France. And the Cathars are another self-acknowledged point of inspiration for George R.R. Martin. They are tied to that inverted Garden of Eden interpretation that I like to talk about. The Manichaean cosmology tells of two dragon monsters, which are the enemies of the sun, moon, and stars, Gochir and Musparig, who are chained to the sun so as to prevent them from causing harm. And that creates the image of comets orbiting in the solar system, of course. They are placed opposite of one another in the sky and are made to turn the celestial wheel of the sky. Musparig may be the original demon responsible for lunar eclipses, which are, of course, known as blood moons, while Gochir seems to be associated with constellations and comets both. Here I will quote, or let Amanda quote, from the Encyclopedia Ironica's summary of a work called the Bundnissen. Bundnissen, which is a compilation of Zoroastrian cosmology derived from two older codices from the 8th and 4th century AD.
At the end of time, Gochir will fall down on the earth, which it will terrify like a wolf does a sheep. Its fire and halo will then melt the metal of Sarawar in the hills and mountains, thus providing the river of molten metal necessary for the purification of men. At the end, after Ormazd himself had come down to the earth to send Oz and Ahriman back into the darkness whence they had come, Gochir the serpent burns in the molten metal, and the pollution of hell burns, and hell becomes pure.
So Gochir, as I said, is not an actual dragon, but a comet, or said another way, a star, which fell from a constellation to the Earth. You remember when I said that many people all around the world have been mythicizing comets and meteors as fiery dragons, right? Well, here you go. This is a pretty fantastic one. And Amanda, remind me again, what happens when Jormungandr is slaughtered? Is there like a flood or something?
So at the time of Ragnarok, Jormungandr's tail will be unleashed. So Jormungandr is considered like a bound monster. So at time of Ragnarok, Jormungandr will become unleashed, and there will be a flood, and there's going to be a boat called Naglafar, which might sound familiar, that is also going to ferry armies of the undead to come battle at the time of Ragnarok. So yeah.
So that
floods
seems
and storms and all of that, and he's going to battle the storm god Thor.
so that essentially seems like the events are shuffled around, but essentially we've got an apocalyptic cataclysm involving a flood tied to a world serpent who is actually a sea dragon, and I guess the flood happens, and then Jormungandr is slaughtered. So, like I said, the order is slightly different, but definitely a variation on these myths. And I guess I somehow forgot about that when I originally wrote the script. But yes, Jormungandr is part of this whole mythology, and of course, there's many ties between Daenerys and Jormungandr as well. And of course, Daenerys is the Moon Maiden, number one, primo uno, par excellence, Moon Maiden, Daenerys. So,
Can I add something real quick?
yes, you totally can, Senrixian.
Amanda might be able to help me with this, but Fenrir is the one who slaughters Odin, and he is also unleashed at Lucy on Cam. Also unleashed at the time of Ragnarok, and I was wondering what that would mean if we compare it in terms of Aswaf, like if Fenrir is related to the Starks or who he has a connection to. So maybe that's something we can talk about later, but I just wanted to mention that because I've been thinking about that.
That does bear following up on. And can't we just kind of roll through these sort of live events by now? I mean, this isn't really that special.
I worry. I'm sorry.
No, I live in California. I'm in full compliance with the law.
Oh yeah,
I'm
that's
good.
right.
Yeah, it's good. Just it's no different from taking a shot here.
True. As it should be.
Yes. In any case, so Mallory, that is a good point, and we shall follow up on that perhaps on Tuesday in the live stream. We can talk about that a little bit. Because, yeah, that does set up the sort of sea dragon versus the hellhound wolf conflict that we could see if there are Stark and Targaryen conflicts awaiting us, couldn't we?
Yes, definitely.
There it is. Cool. So real quick, I'd just like to thank all my mods in the chat. I always forget to thank my mods. I thank everyone for being respectful and not requiring the mods to use the banhammer, of course. And I thank my mods for keeping things humming, keeping it friendly. All right. So we're talking about Gochir, talking about comets, world transforming floods. Says here, okay, so the comet dragon falls from heaven and melts the metal of the earth for means of purification. And this is right in line with all the myths of dragons being slain to transform the world through floods, as well as our own theory about the long night, of course. A world-transforming comet dragon impact connected with rivers of molten metal really has to remind us of the making of Lightbringer from the moon meteor dragon metal, and also to the idea that George sometimes symbolizes the storm of falling stars as a wave of blood in the sky, bleeding stars, like I was saying. So because they are metal and blood, you can sort of think about them as molten metal. That's the similarity I'm trying to point out there. The idea of the two dragons being chained up to the sun, of course, it reminds us of comets orbiting the sun, and it also reminds us of my original idea that the comet was split as it orbited around the sun, creating two dragon comets, just as Tywin Lannister, the Solar King, split ice in two. And this, the fact that one of these Manichaean celestial fire dragons also causes eclipses of one sort or another is obviously something that makes me pretty excited. Now, however, my point isn't to say, aha, George got all of his stuff from the Goatear story. He may not have read the Goatear story. Rather, my point is that associating comet impacts with dragon slaying and world-changing cataclysms and eclipses is actually just can be viewed as a tradition. It's a mythological tradition, and this Vedic mythology is not the only place we find it. So George is essentially just participating with his own myth making. And there's enough of these similar ideas floating around that it's pretty hard to even pin it down to where he got the idea, but it's all over the place. That is the point. So George is speaking the common language of myth and building off of established symbolism, as he likes to do. He does not reinvent the wheel. So you can see the clear echoes of the Goatear story in the Tauroctony, Mithras' slaying of the white lunar bull, which was a part of himself. Mithras sacrifices the white bull, and the bull's blood flows out into the world and triggers a regeneration of life. And one of the differences between Roman Mithraism, from which Mithras comes from, and of course his bull, and then the Persian ancestors of Roman Mithraism, is that dragons are pretty much always evil in Persian mythology, while the same is not true for Roman Mithraism. In the Tauroctony, the white bull plays the role of the slain dragon, but the white bull is a friend to Mithras, just as dragons are seen as a source of knowledge and enlightenment by the initiates of the Mithraic mysteries, as Roman adherents to this secretive religion were named. So part of the point of bringing all this up, besides it being kind of cool and interesting, is to speak of one of the common universal myths which was found from Middle East to India. And that would, of course, be the slaying of the dragon to transform the world. The very oldest version of the story may be the Babylonian myth of Tiamat and Marduk, as I've alluded to at the beginning of this section. Tiamat is a symbol of the chaos of primordial creation, originally a shining mother goddess embodying femininity. When her children kill her husband, however, she incarnates in the form of a monstrous sea dragon, only to be slain by Marduk, who used her divided body to form the heavens and the earth. She also gives birth to dragon children, monsters with poison instead of blood. The tale of Yahweh slaying the Leviathan is thought to have been a version of this Babylonian myth, and it's certainly very similar. Now, I would suggest that all of these dragon slayer myths, many of which are derivative of one another, are playing into the same ideas and themes: death and resurrection, and the world-changing natural and celestial disasters being personified as the wrath of dragons and sea dragons. We can see many parallels to Martin's own version of this myth. A sea dragon who makes or remakes the world, a dragon being slain to effect a creative act, a being who is a mother of dragons, and so on. Marduk is actually a storm god, as is Yahweh, so we can see that the idea of a storm god being the one to slay the dragon is something that has ample mythological precedent. One thinks of Robert Baratheon, the Storm King, slaying Rhaegar the dragon in the River Trident, a scene we've examined a couple of times now, which gives us an incarnation of the Norse storm god slaying a black dragon who falls into the water. We had hammers and falling rubies that flashed like fire in that scene as well. This slaying of the dragon and its line ushers in a new dynasty, with Robert then ruling over the longest summer of bounty and fertility in memory. So it's even turning the seasons. In Ironborn myth, the storm god hurls the thunderbolt moon meteor, while it's the Grey King who slays the sea dragon. But since both meteors are referring to the slaying of the moon and the hammering of its meteor children, they amount to the same thing. Slaying a sea dragon, or more accurately, slaying a moon, which becomes a sea dragon, and hurling down the divine thunderbolt are essentially the same act. And that's also the same thing as swinging the hammer of the gods. The point is, all of these Westerosi fables are derivative of the dragon slayer myths from the real world. And in many myths, it's the storm god or the storm king who slays the dragon. For further reading, I recommend this fantastic analysis of dragons in Persian mythology from the Encyclopedia Iranica, which is linked at lucifermeanslightbringer.com. It's their entry on Azdaha, and the link is, right here, like I said, on the text version of this essay. So I've got a really awesome Leviathan quote that I've been saving, which gives us Robert, the hammer-wielding Storm King, creating dead Leviathans. This is from that first Theon, scratch that, This is from that second Theon chapter of A Clash of Kings that we've been pulling from, the one with the repeated references to Robert's storming of Pike. As Theon is sailing to Pike, he passes by the ruins of Lordsport, and we get this.
When last he'd seen Lordsport, it had been a smoking wasteland. The skeletons of burnt longships and smashed galleys littering the stony shore like the bones of dead Leviathans. The houses no more than broken walls and cold ashes. After 10 years, few traces of the war remained. The small folk had built new hovels with the stones of the old and cut fresh sod for their roofs. A new inn had risen beside the landing, twice the size of the old one, with a lower story of cut stone and 2 upper stories of timber. The set beyond had never been rebuilt, though. Only a 7-sided foundation remained where it had stood. Robert Baratheon's fury had soured the Ironmen's taste for the new gods, it would seem. Theon was more interested in ships than gods.
Remember how I said that the bones of Naga might actually be the flipped over hull of a Weirwood boat? Well, here we have a direct comparison between the wooden ships and sea dragons. In this case, burnt and smashed ships are compared to the bones of dead leviathans. Theon is thinking of the leviathans as in dead whale skeletons, but the hint here is about the leviathan, the sea dragon. Shortly thereafter, Theon compares the ships to gods, completing the circle and bringing us back to the notion of the leviathan as a fallen god or goddess. We are going to get down to the sea dragon as a boat thing in a minute, so file that one away for now. Okay, so let's take a quick look around the scene here at Lordsport, starting with the name. This is the place where the gods come into port. That's our sea dragon goddess coming into port with her heavenly cargo. The name is similar in nature to the name King's Landing, which symbolically refers to the landing of King Azor High Reborn, the moon meteor. And the same is true of the name Lordsport, though it might have more literal implications since we think a meteor actually landed at the Iron Islands. As for the Storm King Robert Baratheon, he landed here with his hammer and his wrath, and he transformed it into what Theon remembers as a smoking wasteland, littered with burnt sea dragon bones. In his attack, he's reenacting the Hammer of the Waters, the striking of the storm god's thunderbolt, setting fire to the wooden boats instead of trees, and the slaying of the sea dragon by leaving the burnt bones of Leviathans laying around. Toss in the other references to this battle, and we have the hammer cracking open the crescent of dark stone, as well as Thoros' flaming sword coming through the breach, giving us references to the Lightbringer myth and the Hammer of the Waters once again. In fact, you could say that the entire reason that the Iron Islands Rebellion exists is simply so that Martin can depict Storm King Robert Baratheon repeatedly striking the Iron Islands with his hammer. At least that's what I would say. So just as we see Robert hammering away on the Iron Islands to suggest a link to the Hammer of the Waters and the Thunderbolt of the Storm God, we have dragon attacks on the Iron Islands to suggest the Sea Dragon and the Flaming Sword symbols. The first one involves House Volmark of the Iron Islands, whose sigil is a black leviathan on gray, which certainly invites further scrutiny. George R. R. Martin is a well-known lover of heraldry, and I believe he often makes use of heraldry to drop massive clues about the mysteries of the series. It turns out that the only significant member of the House of the Black Leviathan, House Volmark, in history, besides the young Lord Volmark in the main story, is Corin Volmark. He was a distant relation to King Harwin Hardhand Hoare, who briefly claimed the Seastone chair in 2 AC after King Aegon the Conqueror roasted Black Heron Hoare and his sons at Harrenhal. Sorry, cough button there. Corin Volmark then declared himself the rightful heir of the Black Line, which refers to the supposedly black-blooded members of House Hoare. Of course, we've seen that the black blood is a very important motif in our collection of moon death symbolism. Having the fire inside you turns your blood black, for example. So this detail stands out as significant. Corin Volmark is a black-blooded black leviathan. We know what that's all about. A black bloodstone meteor which turns into a sea dragon leviathan. Now, the crux of Corin's story is this, from the world of Ice and Fire.
Other claimants soon arose on Great Wick, Pike, and Orkmont, and for a full year and a half their followers fought each other by land and sea. Aegon the Conqueror put an end to that fighting in 2 AC when he and Balerion descended upon Great Wick, accompanied by a vast war fleet. The Ironmen collapsed before him. Corn Volmark died at the Conqueror's own hand, cut down by Aegon's Valyrian steel blade, Blackfire.
Aegon wields the sword Blackfire, while his dragon Balerion breathes Blackfire. They're basically matching symbols. Balerion descends upon Old Wick, the exact location of Naga's bones. This might be a reenacting of the sea dragons landing on the Iron Islands, perhaps on Old Wick itself, where it might have created the crescent-shaped bay known as Naga's Cradle. Yes. Meanwhile, Aegon kills Corran the Black Leviathan with Blackfire the sword. The Grey King slew Naga and possessed her fire, and here that is represented by Aegon slaying the Black Leviathan and also possessing Blackfire in the form of a sword. Although technically he didn't get the Blackfire sword from Corran, the Black Leviathan, the symbolism is nevertheless there. Aegon slew the sea dragon by slaying the Black Leviathan, and he possessed the Blackfire in the form of a sword, so it works for me. This would seem to be a match for the idea that the Grey King and the ancient Ironborn fashioned black soul-drinking weapons from the sea dragon meteor, as I was saying earlier. It also equates the Grey King with our Black Dragon Azor Ahai archetype, an idea we had as soon as we heard that the Grey King was a stealer of heavenly fire. More on this to come. As a side note, the vast war fleet accompanying the Black Dragons would represent the meteor shower, which accompanied the 2 large moon meteors. Remember, the idea is that 3 dragon moon meteors descended to Planetos, with one breaking up into the meteor shower and making large impacts. Although that's kind of overly specific, something I wrote a long time ago. I'm not sure if I would stick by that now. I don't really talk about the specific number of moon meteors, but we all know that Dany had 3 dragons, and we've got that 3 heads has the dragon thing. So a lot of times the meteor shower is symbolized by a trio of moon meteor things. So there you go. Now, this is yet another connection between sea dragons and ships. These ships are owned by a Targaryen. We're talking about the Targaryen fleet here. And thus they are dragon ships, or ocean-going dragons, you might say. Sea dragons, after a fashion. We're totally going to talk about boats in a minute, I promise. Aegon's sacking of the Iron Islands is referenced in A Feast for Crows at the King's Moot by Eric Drum, wielder of the Valyrian steel sword Red Rain. And remember that when he refers to the Black Line being ended, he's talking about Aegon's slaying of Corn Volmark.
When the Black Line was consumed by dragonfire, the Ironborn gave the primacy to Vigon Greyjoy, aye, but as lord, not king.
I've included this quote because its phrasing about the bloodline of the Black Leviathan being consumed in dragonfire suggests the idea of the moon's blood being incinerated and blackened by the comet's impact and the resulting explosion, which would be the dragonfire. A black-blooded Leviathan burning with black dragonfire. That fits our picture of Dark Lightbringer the sword pretty well. I mean, that's it exactly. And I think the message is that the Leviathan or Sea Dragon meteor was the same kind of black moon meteor from which Lightbringer was made. Maybe it was a sea stone chair. Or the sea stone couch, like I was saying. There's a nice companion to Aegon and Balerion's attack on the Iron Islands to be found in A Dance with Dragons, on the far side of the world, actually, as Daenerys rides her black dragon, Drogon. This, too, reinforces the idea of the Iron Islands having been shaped by the fire of the sea dragon, which is the Black Leviathan. You're muted. There you go.
Sorry. In a dozen heartbeats, they were past the Dothraki, as he galloped far below. To the right and left, Dany glimpsed places where the grass was burned and ashen. Drogon has come this way before, she realized. Like a chain of gray islands, the marks of his hunting dotted the green grass sea.
The chain of gray islands in a green sea, burnt by black dragonfire. It's pretty nice. These gray islands are all places where the dragon landed. It may also be a reference to the chain of islands known as the Stepstones, the former arm of Dorne, which has a bloodstone island as well as a gray gallows. Gray island chains in the sea, indeed. There's another nice clue about black fire and black weapons on the Iron Islands at the time of the Long Night, to be found in House Harlaw and their Valyrian steel sword, Nightfall. House Harlaw's sigil is the silver scythe, indicating the harvest season and perhaps a bit of grim reaping, because as we know, the Ironborn do not sow, they're all about reaping. Don't fear the reaper. The silver scythe evokes the lunar crescent, of course, one that has turned into a deadly weapon. That's what this whole thing is about. The Lord of the Iron Islands also styles himself Lord Reaper, for what it's worth. Now, the sword Nightfall itself has a moonstone pommel, as we've talked about before, which is a nice clue about moonstones causing the nightfall of all nightfalls. Nightfall was taken for House Harlaw by the Red Kraken Dalton Greyjoy. Nobody knows how the sword came into the possession of House Harlaw, but the Red Kraken himself is an Azor Ahai Bloodstone Emperor symbol who will receive further analysis in the future, because take my word for it, he's the right guy to be associated with the Moonstone Valyrian steel sword Nightfall. The name Red Kraken is a tip-off, and of course he also attacks Westeros from the west, just like Euron is doing now. And of course Euron is a Bloodstone Emperor parallel, so it gives you a hint. But if you go through and read the entire story of the Red Kraken Dalton Greyjoy, and there's actually a lot of detail, you will see it is full of Azor Ahai stuff. In any case, it's also worth mentioning that House Volmark of the Black Leviathan sigil lives on the island of Harlaw and takes their lead from House Harlaw, kind of like a bannerman. The parade of Ironborn sigil-based symbolism continues on Great Wick. Oh boy, does it ever. In the Hardstone Hills at the Hammerhorn Keep of House Goodbrother. And here we'll spice our discussion of black swords, sea dragons, and here we'll spice our discussion of black swords and sea dragons with a bit more Hammer of the Waters flavor. House Goodbrother draws their wealth from their mines, which produce iron and other minerals. Their sigil is a gold-banded black war horn on a field of red, which bears a very uncanny resemblance to Euron's Dragonbinder horn, which splits the air as sharp as a sword thrust when it is sounded, as well as the fake horn of Jormund that Melisandre burns at the wall in A Dance with Dragons. These horns are associated with dragons and earthquakes, respectively, both of which come together at the Iron Islands, where the sea dragon caused an earthquake. The description of the breaking of the arm of Dorne with the Hammer of the Waters, giants awoke in the earth and all Westeros shook and trembled, also matches the description of the Horn of Jormund's supposed effects, waking giants in the earth. And here we find a Hammerhorn Keep. Hammerhorn Keep, yes, that's right. If that weren't enough, cadet branches of House Goodbrother are found at places with such symbolically rich names as Crow Spike Keep, Down Delving, Corpse Lake, and Shatterstone. Now, to reinforce these ideas, here's a quote from the very first Ironborn chapter of Feast for Crows, where Aeron Damphair is coming up to the Hammerhorn Keep after casually drowning some fanatics.
It was long after dark, by the time the priest espied the spiky iron battlements of the Hammerhorn clawing at the crescent moon. Geralt's Keep was hulking and blocky, its great stones quarried from the cliff that loomed behind it. Below its walls, the entrances of caves and ancient mines yawned like toothless black mouths. The Hammerhorn's iron gates had been closed and barred for the night. Aaron beat on them with a rock until the clanging woke a guard. The hall was dank and drafty, full of shadows. One of Geralt's daughters offered the priest a horn of ale. Another poked at a sullen fire that was giving off more smoke than heat.
If we were wondering whether the name Hammerhorn was supposed to be a clue about the Hammer of the Waters, we find the Hammerhorn's spiky iron is clawing at the moon, connecting the idea of the moon being attacked and pulled down with hammers and horns and iron claws. The idea of the celestial horn plays on both the horns of the dragon comet, which clawed the moon, as well as the sound of the horn, which again, in the case of Dragonbinder, split the air like a sword thrust. I believe the horn and other references to loud sounds and screams refer to Nissa-Nissa's cry of anguish and ecstasy. That's the sound which is actually said to break the moon in the Lightbringer story, after all. In other words, the comet pierced the moon with its dragon horn, The sound of the moon's scream of the impact was like the sound of a screaming hell horn. These horns brought down the hammer of the waters. And yes, I think the implication here is that the horn of Jormung and Dragonbinder might actually be the same thing, or the same type of thing, and that one such horn may even have been involved in bringing down the moon. Though that's a subject for another day, and actually a subject for an upcoming Signs and Portals episode. This is one of the things we're going to be building on in that series. Returning to the scene, Aeron beats on the iron gate of the keep with a stone, creating a sound that wakes the sleepers, if you know what I mean. And I know you do. George often gives us a metaphor in more than one form in the same scene just to drive the point across. Aeron being offered a horn of ale after he wakes the sleeping folk of the Hammer Horn keep is a great example of this technique. Inside the keep itself, it's full of shadows, and it's lit by a fire that gives off more smoke than heat, which is more or less how I've been describing the general magic of the R'hllorys for a long time, more shadow than light. And of course, fires that give off a lot of smoke reminds us of moon meteor impacts. This fire, which does not give off much light or heat, is actually a reoccurring motif, which always seems to apply to the shadowy, corrupted fire magic that we see throughout the series, which is born from the fallout of the Long Night. Finally, we saw the caves to the mines yawning like toothless black mouths, perhaps the place where they mined the sea dragon bones, meaning the meteorite ore, or perhaps these are just symbolic of the general concept of mining sea dragon ore. The Grey King was said to have made a throne from Naga's fangs, so perhaps these toothless mouths refer to the defanged sea dragon, although that could certainly just be a coincidence. Said another way, the Ironborn bring black iron out from inside of the black mouths of the mountain's mines, while the black bloodstone, the moon meteor ore, comes from the insides of the sea dragon meteor. Finally, there's a sneaky clue about the Hammer of the Waters being connected to the Leviathan in the world of ice and fire. In the section on the breaking of the arm of Dorne, which Maester Yandel rightly calls the single most important event in Dornish history and mayhaps the history of all Westeros, they speculate about what the real cause of the breaking might have been, given that the Maesters reject the more magical explanations.
Archmaester Cassander suggests elsewise, in his Song of the Sea, how the lands were severed, arguing that it was not the singing of the Green Seer that separated Westeros from Essos, but rather what he calls the Song of the Sea, a slow rising of the waters that took place over centuries.
But Aeron Damphair already told us that the drowned god sings through the waves in the language of Leviathan. And so we can see that the Song of the Sea, at least the one which drowned the arm of Dorne, is really the song of the island drowning sea dragon, whose language is the flood. Additionally, the Lord of House Harlaw, the Silver Scythe, has a boat named Sea Song, linking the Hammer of the Waters with the Ironborn and Silver Moon Scythes, and to the idea of sea dragons as boats, which is what we're going to discuss next. Yay! This is like my favorite section coming up here. So this is the end of this section. We're getting ready to talk about fish. Woo! Ah. Check in, Amanda. Tell me something.
Talk about fish.
Oh, God. Let's see what you've done. Oh, my. I love how this, oh, my goodness.
There's so much. There's so much.
How did Joe end up in the shame cube? Tell me what's going on there.
Joe
he just deserves to be in there for his, he's my friend. I can yell at him. You can get released from the shame cube maybe later. Maybe. He's saying in chat. We've got Helen down here eating someone. She's a man-eating fish.
Can I just point out that the Hawaiian shirt is basically the same thing as a shame cube, and when you put one on, you're essentially putting yourself in the shame cube?
Oh my god. He's in a quadra-cube of shame.
Ooh, nice.
Maybe 8. I don't know. How many sides would that be? 12.
Hyper shame cube.
Hyper shame cube. We've got a sea weirwood for Robar. Carabarus joined the party.
Carathulu.
Oh,
And
nice.
Thor. And there's a sea unicorn. Oh, and Jinx and Bernie hanging out on the inside.
Is that a cigarette?
Sure, cigarette. It is definitely a cigarette.
Burning.
Oh.
Yeah.
Right.
Known for
She's
burning
like-
one down.
Oh.
Nice. This is great. This is great.
Thank you. Carry
I love
on.
it.
Carry on.
Oh, I need a second. I need to catch my breath. Let me say hello to the chat real quick. Chat, by the way, on episodes like this, I obviously can't stop and answer questions on the way through, but just know that I always watch these episodes back essentially just to read the chat. So anything that you say in there, I probably won't see it now, but I will see it on the watch back. So hope you guys are having fun. I see that you're interacting with Sanri as I'm reading here, so that's just perfect. And yes, Jinx, I hope you are suitably honored. Everyone, give Jinx a round of applause for the great job she did last week on Between Two Weirwoods. Her and Lola were awesome. Yeah, totally. Round of applause. Round of applause.
Yeah.
Well, round of applause emojis. I guess I should say.
I'll tell you a little secret. I wanted to watch the whole thing, so I called out from work. So
Well, hopefully no one at your work watches these also. Your secret's safe with us.
yeah.
See, this is why I don't advertise about work and try to be all paranoid about things, because I'm like, if my boss watches this.
Yeah.
Be nice to Sanri's boss. Give her a raise.
Oh my god. Let's not talk about that on air. All right.
No, you don't have to say. You can say no comment, and I'll say give her a raise. So, all right. Pulling up my Patreon and queuing up my music at a slightly lower volume, if I can. Let me just. Okay. All right. Let's see how this goes. Some smelly fish. This section is brought to you by Memosime, the poem on 2 feet, mother of muses, rider of the dragon saga, and guardian of the celestial swan. By Nienna the Wise, the Persephoenix, guardian of the ice dragon, whose words are from sorrow, wisdom. Daphne Eversweet, queen bee of the red poppy fields, guardian of the celestial crone's lantern, and keeper of the black rabbit with big pointy nasty teeth who can leap about. And Manami of the Jade Sea, the merry deviant, keeper of the winter roses, and guardian of the celestial ghost. And of course, Manami of the Jade Sea, the merry deviant, is none other than Maester Mary of the Up From Under Winterfell YouTube channel. So extra big shout out to her. And if we can get a link dropped in the chat, that would be awesome. Maester Mary joined me a couple weeks ago, of course. And yeah, Maester Mary, you can drop in your own damn link because you're a moderator. Yeah. Oh, hey, my patron name. Yeah, it's you, man. And of course, shout out to Nienna the Wise, who's been drawing closer into our inner circle of myth heads. It's great to have you in, Nienna. You are brilliant and are bringing a lot. All right, let's see. Sanri, I just saw your last message in the chat. I wasn't watching it. Sorry to hear that. Behind the scenes talk, guys. Behind the scenes talk. So, some smelly fish. Okay, let's talk about boats. And let's put the screen back on me. Glorious me. There we are. There I am. The silverish gray king. All right, with red eyes like a weirwood. Okay, so let's talk about boats. Like most myths, I believe that the sea dragon and the other Grey King mythology does refer to historical events, not just symbolism. At least one, if not more. The first would be the moon meteor, which seems to have fallen. Sorry there. I got a Cranog frog in my throat for a second. So the first real historical event would be the moon meteor impact, of course, that fell near the Iron Islands the sea dragon as a falling meteor. The second may be a story about a foreign people who possessed fire in some sense coming to Westeros in boats. Sea dragons as boats carrying fire-associated people. What I can say for sure is that the boat is an important part of the sea dragon symbolism. So we'll follow this line of symbolism and you can decide what you think it means. We're going to work our way to the idea of Naga's ribs being a boat, but first I want to break down two scenes involving Targaryens and their boats, because Targaryen boats work fantastically as a symbol of the sea dragon as a boat. We'll begin with a lovely passage from A Storm of Swords, when Daenerys is, and you're going to like this, sailing to Slaver's Bay on 3 ships named after Aegon's 3 dragons. That's right, not only do the boats belong to a dragon, they are actually named after dragons. This chapter begins by introducing the idea that Daenerys loves the sea, and builds on the sea dragon idea through the naming of the ships, and finally the activity of the dragons themselves. Picking things up near the beginning of the chapter. Amanda, take it away.
Her Dothraki called the sea the poison water, distrusting any liquid that their horses could not drink. On the day the 3 ships had lifted anchor at Karth, you would have thought they were sailing to hell instead of Pentos. Her brave young blood riders had stared off at the dwindling coastline with huge white eyes, each of the 3 determined to show no fear before the other 2, while her handmaids, Irri and Jiki, clutched the rail desperately and rushed over the side at every little swell.
So, Daenerys, 3 ships we have for 3 dragons of Aegon and Daenerys, and more importantly, for 3 primary dragon meteors coming from the moon. The 3 blood riders play into the symbolism as well. I've mentioned before that the term blood rider builds on the Dothraki's interpretation of stars as horses, the celestial Khalasar, by adding blood. They're blood riders, creating the symbol of the blood riders as bleeding stars. And here they have huge white eyes to remind us of the moon.
No squall could frighten Dany. Though, Daenerys Stormborn she was called, for she had come howling into the world on distant Dragonstone as the greatest storm in the memory of Westeros howled outside, a storm so fierce that it ripped gargoyles from the castle walls and smashed her father's fleet to kindling.
So Daenerys, a symbol of both the moon, which was the mother of dragons, and the reborn dragon herself, is called Stormborn because, well, I would say, because Azor Ahai was born during the storm that ravaged Planetos and caused the Long Night. You guys know all about that. We saw in the Tyrion Targaryen episode how the Blackstone gargoyles have a heritage involving stone dragons and therefore make tremendous fiery black meteor symbols. Describing the boats, the Targaryen boats, as kindling evokes the idea of burning wood boats, just as we saw with the burnt ships at Lordsport, which resembled the bones of Leviathans. The sea dragon brings fire to the earth, of course, so burning ships fit right in, and also refer to the tree set ablaze by the storm god's thunderbolt. Aha.
The narrow sea was often stormy, and Dany had crossed it 100 times as a girl, running from one free city to the next, half a step ahead of the usurpers' hired knives. She loved the sea. She liked the sharp, salty smell of the air, and the vastness of the horizons bounded only by a vault of azure sky above. It made her feel small, but free as well. She liked the dolphins that sometimes swam along the side of Balerion, slicing through the waves like silvery spears, and the flying fish they glimpsed now and again. She even liked the sailors, with their songs and stories. Once on a voyage to Braavos, she watched the crew wrestle down a great green sail in a rising gale. She had even thought how fine it would be to be a sailor. But when she told her brother, Viserys had twisted her hair until she cried. "You are blood of the dragon," he had screamed at her. "A dragon, not some smelly fish." He was a fool about that, and about so much else, Dany thought.
Doggo. We heard the doggos.
You want me to redo that?
Yeah, they're howling for the foolishness of Viserys. A dragon, not some smelly fish. Anyways, we'll cut in here and let the dogs cut in here to have a laugh and a howl at Viserys' expense. We've already seen that Viserys isn't too good with symbolism and metaphor. He got burned by that whole "I am the dragon and I will be crowned" thing after all. We, however, pay much closer attention, and we cannot fail to miss all the dragon-fish comparison going on here. So the three ships are named for Aegon's three dragons, and the narrative weaves the ships and Dany watching her dragons fly through the air together in the very first paragraph. Dany herself is a kind of sea dragon, the blood of the dragon who loves the water and the sea. She's at one with the storm, unafraid, the stormborn. She's born on a dragon stone in the middle of the sea, which is itself a clue about dragons, which are stones landing in the ocean during the worst storm in history. Of course, the only memories we have of the actual worst storm in history, the one which also raged around dragon stones in the sea, are hidden under layers of myth. But that's what we're doing here. That's why we're doing what we're doing here, after all. Chasing down the worst storm in history. Storm chasers. They're only 10,000 years old. Anyways, the dragon-fish comparison takes flight in the next paragraph with flying fish and dolphins that look like silvery spears and which swim alongside Balerion, the dragon boat. There's more talk of Dany herself loving everything about the sea, and then a direct comparison between dragons and fish, as Viserys says that a dragon is not a fish. The next words are, "He was a fool about that and so much else." That's clear enough. The only way it could be any more clear is if Old Nan showed up with a copy of Septon Barth's Dragons, Worms, and Wyverns, Their Unnatural History, to read us a bedtime story about sea dragons. I think that's going to be released in December, right? Right? Septon Barth, Dragons, Worms, and Wyverns? No? Okay, maybe not. Actually, it does get a bit more clear, as someone does directly compare the comet to a fish back in A Clash of Kings.
Catelyn raised her eyes to where the faint red line of the comet traced a path across the deep blue sky, like a long scratch across the face of God. The Great John told Robb that the old gods had unfurled a red flag of vengeance for Ned. Edmure thinks it's an omen of victory for Red River Run. He sees a fish with a long tail in the Tully colors, red against blue.
So far, there seems to be a bit of truth to be found in every single thing the comet has been directly compared to, although the fish with a long tail description was one of the last ones to make sense. Returning to the scene with Dany and her sea dragon boats.
The captain appeared at her elbow. Would that this Balerion could soar at her namesake as her namesake did, Your Grace, he said in Bastard Balerion, heavily flavored with accents of Pentos. Then we should not need to row, nor tow, nor pray for wind.
Symbolic association between dragons and boats continues all throughout these paragraphs, as Dany and the captain compare dragons and ships to each other as a means of crossing the sea. And then we get a more literal manifestation of the sea dragon idea, and this is a real winner.
Viserion's scales were the color of fresh cream, his horns, wing bones, and spinal crest a dark gold that flashed bright as metal in the sun. Rhaegal was made of the green of summer and the bronze of fall. They soared above the ships in wide circles, higher and higher, each trying to climb above the other. Dragons always preferred to attack from above, Dany had learned. Should either get between the other and the sun, he would fold his wings and dive screaming, and they would tumble from the sky, locked together in a tangled, scaly ball, jaws snapping and tails lashing. The first time they had done it, she feared they might kill each other. But that was only sport. No sooner would they splash into the sea than they would break apart and rise again, shrieking and hissing, the salt water steaming off them as their wings clawed at the air. Drogon was aloft as well, though not in sight. He would be miles ahead or miles behind, hunting. He was always hungry, her Drogon, hungry and growing fast. Another year or perhaps 2, and he may be large enough to ride. Then I shall have no need of ships to cross the great salt sea. But that time was not yet come. Rhaegal and Viserion were the size of small dogs. Drogon only a little larger. Any dog would have outweighed them. They were all wings and neck and tail, lighter than they looked. And so Daenerys Targaryen must rely on wood and wind and canvas to bear her home.
Everybody's talking shit about my wig having bedhead, man. I'm trying to smooth it out. It's hard to store wigs in drawers. They get a little bedhead. So I just have to deal with it. In any case, back to the action. Thanks for reading that great quote. There's only like 20 things to talk about there. Hopefully y'all caught some of them on your own with your sharp myth head eyes that you've got. Sharp myth eye. Anyways, so there's nothing I love, of course, better than a good dragon eclipse. It comes as the dragons try to get in between each other and the sun. It's like their actual attack tactic is to create eclipses and then dive bomb, just as the moon was in eclipse position before it sent its moon dragons dive bombing. At the moment of the dragon eclipse, we get our sea dragon meteor image plummeting towards the ocean, which is a really terrific confirmation of the eclipse idea and a good match for all the times the Drogon's wings passed before the sun and darkened the world, as we've seen in previous essays. Now, the falling dragons then splash into the water in a scaly ball and break apart, like the broken sword of land and all the broken sword symbols, and then rise again harder and stronger, perhaps. According to Ironborn theology, the sea dragon rose from the sea, as did the Grey King and the drowned god himself. And the Ironborn, of course, conduct ritual drowning and resurrection ceremonies. And as I mentioned, carrying fire from the sea is a very important aspect of this combined myth. And that's what we may be talking about here, harvesting sea dragon material from the sea. In fact, the hissing and steaming as the dragons plunge into the water and fly back out reminds me of a sword being tempered in cold water, or a hot meteor stone landing in the ocean, which is basically the same idea on a larger scale. This idea is directly implied by the choice to describe the dragons as metal here. Rhaegal's dark spinal crest, horns, and wing bones flashed as bright as metal in the sun. I mean, it's really like the dragon metal dropping out of the sky from an eclipse and becoming the sea dragon, landing in the ocean, and then rising from the waves. It's pretty great stuff. The folded wings of the soon-to-be sea dragon may be meant as a call-out to Leviathan, whose name, of course, means that which is gathered into folds, as well as the folded steel of Valyrian steel swords. And for what it's worth, there's also a funny line where Jorah talks about the Westerosi tales of dragons big enough to snatch krakens from the sea, which reminds us of the idea that the sea dragon Naga fed on krakens. At the least, it serves as a clue to make us think about sea dragons and Ironborn mythology. I just love the double metaphor in the scene. We have sea dragons as ships and sea dragons as metal dragons falling into the sea. Throw in the eclipse and I am a happy customer. And here I'll do another screen share. This is an image I have embedded in the doc. This is called the Nine Dragon Wall, and it's in Behe Park in China. And there you can see the water dragon motif that I was talking about earlier.
Can
Very
you
cool
share
picture.
your screen again?
Oh, derp. And here you can see me talking about a picture that you can't see. Now, here's the picture. It is pretty famous, called Nine Dragon Wall. And there you can see the water dragons questing after the Pearl of Immortality, which is that fiery ball in the middle. There you go.
It's beautiful. It's a Chinese or Korean, maybe? I think Chinese.
I think this one is Chinese. Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
Yep, I love that style of dragon. Sanri, if we get to drawing dragons for new stuff, I definitely like that long sea serpent style, and I love the claws too. They have the
In Chinese mythology, dragons were seen as like good, as you kind of mentioned earlier, and like they were definitely questing after those pearls. We could do a whole panel on like dragon symbolism sometime if you wanted. Anyway, Carry on.
It's a good reminder of how the dragons are associated with the fire of the gods by a lot of people. So
Yeah.
very cool, very cool. So this scene that we just talked about is actually very reminiscent of another dragon attack scene that we've looked at before in the Mountain versus the Viper episode, and that one also features a dragon eclipse and then a sea dragon symbol, although it's sadly lacking in boats. I'm speaking of the dragon on dragon battle between Daemon Targaryen riding Caraxes the Bloodworm and Aemond One-Eye Targaryen riding Vhagar above the God's Eye during the Dance of the Dragons, a battle recounted to us in The Princess and the Queen. The first relevant line was...
The attack came sudden as a thunderbolt. Caraxes dove down upon Vhagar with a piercing shriek that was heard a dozen miles away, cloaked by the glare of the setting sun on Prince Aemon's blind side.
In this scene, we have a dragon eclipse to symbolize the moon wandering too close to the sun, a dragon attack from that eclipse to symbolize the moon dragons, a comparison of the dragon attack to a thunderbolt to remind us of the storm god's thunderbolt, and then there's an off-the-charts, ear-piercing shriek to remind us of the sound which broke the moon, which would, of course, be Nissanissa's cry of anguish and ecstasy. And in fact, in the last scene, I didn't mention it, but there was a line where they would, block out the sun and then dive screaming. But that sounds a lot like die screaming. And die screaming that's what Nissanissa did. She died and screamed and broke the moon. So we're going to build on the sound thing in the future and go back through all the sound quotes. But I just wanted to point that one out. So then the sea dragon image here at the God's Eye comes as the dragons lock together in the sky, much like the scene with Viserion and Rhaegal, and then plunge into the water.
Half a heartbeat later, the dragons struck the lake, sending up a gout of water so high that it was said to have been as tall as Kingspire Tower.
There's also a couple of clues about recovering the sea dragon meteor from the water here, because Caraxes, though mortally injured, managed to crawl back onto land beneath the walls of Harrenhal before expiring, while years later, Vhagar's body was found somehow, and we know that at least his skull was recovered because we supposedly see it beneath King's Landing in the current story. Also recovered was the Valyrian steel sword Jark's sister, which Daemon had epically jammed into Aemon's blind eye before hitting the water. Now, I'm not sure if they hired some Merlings or Squishers to go down there with a bone saw and recover this stuff or what, but somehow they did. Maybe they used the Weirwood submarine. So, recovered from the water, we have a red dragon, a black dragon sword, and at least the skull of another dead dragon, all of which are terrific Lightbringer symbols. It may be that these are metaphors referring to the Ironborn recovering sea dragon material, as their mythology would suggest. Bringing fire out of the sea, as we've said so many times. But where were we? Boats. That's right, boats. Ships is really the correct word, but saying boats is more fun. In any case, the second major scene with the Targaryen ships involves the burning of the Seven on Dragonstone, a famous scene where the forging of Lightbringer is reenacted literally and symbolically. This is a really creative one by George. I think you're going to get a kick out of this. So, burnt and broken ships can be like the bones of a Leviathan, and ships owned by Targaryens are like sea dragons, dragons that swim or sail. Naming the ships after dragons is one better, especially when those dragons were themselves named after the old gods of Valyria. The sea dragon is a drowned goddess, and the dragon ships are named for gods and dragons both. Well, what if we could turn those sea dragon boats back into gods and then, I don't know, set them on fire? That'd be some pretty cool symbolism, right?
The morning air was dark with the smoke of burning gods. They were all afire now, maid and mother, warrior and smith, the crone with her pearl eyes, and the father with his gilded beard. Even the stranger, carved to look more animal than human. The old dry wood and countless layers of paint and varnish blazed with a fierce, hungry light. Heat rose, shimmering through the chill air. Behind, the gargoyles and stone dragons on the castle walls seemed blurred, as if Davos were seeing them through a veil of tears, or as if Beasts were trembling, stirring. The burning gods cast a pretty light, wreathed in their robes of shifting flame, red and orange and yellow. Septim Beret had once told Davos how they had been carved from the masts of the ships that had carried the first Targaryens from Valyria. Over the centuries, they had been painted and repainted, gilded, silvered, jeweled. Their beauty will make them more pleasing to R'hllor, Melisandre said once. She told Stannis to pull them down and drag them out the castle gates.
Liz.
Oh man, I just gave a great speech. It was all impromptu. I don't know if I can repeat it. Yeah, it's gone. No, I'm kidding. I was just reading the script. I'll read it again. So pulling down the true gods to make a bonfire to forge Lightbringer. Who would do such a thing? The Azor High Impressionist Stannis Baratheon, that's who. The wooden sea dragon ships, which brought the Targaryens to Dragonstone, have indeed become wooden gods. And then they became burning wooden gods. The fact that it was the masts of the ships, the part that still looks like a tree, that became the burning gods, brings us right back to the burning tree motif, the one from the story of the storm god's thunderbolt setting a tree ablaze. That means that the burning wooden gods represent both the sea dragon and the burning tree. And those are both mediums by which the Grey King obtained the fire of the gods. And what does Stannis pull from this burning tree, which is also a piece of sea dragon? Why, it's Lightbringer, which is also the fire of the gods, of course. This lines up with what I've been saying all along. The sea dragon and the thunderbolt, both of which gave the Grey King divine fire, are in fact two halves of the exact same story. They represent different aspects of the same event. And that event is the landing of a black moon meteor near the Iron Islands and the making of evil black swords from its meteoric metal. And perhaps an invasion of Proto-Valerian dragon people from Ashai. Shout out to History of Westeros and the Great Empire of the Dawn episodes. All right, so there are two more quotes from the burning of the Seven Scene on Dragonstone that we need to look at before we move on, and they connect to Ironborn mythology.
Okay. Melisandre lifted her hands above her head. Behold, a sign was promised, and now a sign is seen. Behold, Lightbringer, Azor Ahai has come again. All hail the warrior of light. All hail the son of fire. A ragged wave of shouts gave answer, just as Stannis' glove began to smolder. Cursing, the king thrust the point of the sword into the damp earth and beat out the flames against his leg. Lord, cast your light upon us, Melisandre called out.
I was trying to find Aziz's pun. He apparently made a good pun, as is his wont, and I missed it. Oh well, I'll see it on the rewatch. So, they're standing on the beach. Stannis Ahai shoves his flaming sword into the damp earth. I mean, it's not quite a sea dragon, but it's pretty close. And honestly, if the Ironborn somehow harvested the meteorite, then this sea dragon meteor probably landed close to shore or even right on the shore. You can't rule out those Deep One's recovery units that I was referring to, but still. The sequence here is great. Stannis is angry and even curses as he jams Lightbringer into the earth. And then Melisandre says, Lord, cast your light upon us. That about sums it up. Angry, wrathful sea dragon meteors and a cursed Lightbringer. The light of the Lord, everyone, soak it in. Next, we have an appearance of the unholy tide.
Melisandre sang in the tongue of Ashai, her voice rising and falling like the tides of the sea. Stannis untied his singled his singed leather cape, and listened in silence. Thrust in the ground, Lightbringer still glowed ruddy hot, but the flames that clung to the sword were dwindling and dying. By the time the song was done, only charred remains of the gods, and the king's patience had run its course.
Melisandre is, of course, a prime fire moon symbol, and it's her song that brings the tides. We know which tides those are, the tides of Moonblood. Meanwhile, Lightbringer is cooling in the wet ground where it landed. The sea dragon gods are now charwood, much like the burnt ships at Lordsport, which were like the bones of dead Leviathans. As I said a moment ago, the sea dragon and the thunderbolt stories both refer to falling moon meteors and the fire of the gods, but represent two different aspects of this event. We've got a pretty good idea about what the sea dragon is, a black meteor, and what fire was, or what its fire was, the black meteorite metal to make swords with, the kind Azor Ahai used to make Lightbringer. As for the storm god's thunderbolt, the fire from the sky aspect is easy to understand, and we've caught on to the connection to the hammer of the waters via the incorporation of Thor's lightning hammer symbolism, but what exactly is the meaning of this burning tree? I've suggested that the symbol of the burning tree refers to the weirwood trees, with the red hands of blood and flame, and that's where the bones of Naga and the idea of a weirwood boat come in handy. All right. Oh, man. I don't think that I'm going to finish this entire episode, Amanda. I think I'm going to have to chop the last fire sorcerer part off, which I probably should have done originally anyways. Because, it was one of those moments when I was starting to write that section. I was like, I should probably end the essay here. But I really want to get this idea in, jammed it in, and you're still muted. And the episode turned out to be 2.5 hours. And so I think, I don't think we're going to get to that last section, though.
Sounds good. However you want to do it. I am going to have to start getting ready for work in about 30 minutes. So.
Yep, that's the time limit I got too. So
yeah.
Let me take a look at how long this next section is. It is very short. Yes. We'll do fishy rack of ribs and then maybe stop. We'll see. All right. Get some new Patreons to honor. Oh, yes, we've got a couple. Start from the beginning. Start from the beginning. There we go. A fishy rack of ribs. This section is brought to you by Han Neversolo, the Scorpion Mind, Cyber Pincher of the Weirwood Net, and Guardian of the Celestial Stallion and the Horned Lord. And by Direliz, the Alpha Patron, a descendant of Gilbert of the Vines and Garth the Green, an earthly avatar of Heavenly House Aquarius. Lord Leopold the Victorious, the Fire Lion of Lancasterly Rock, earthly avatar of Heavenly House Leo. And Werlane Dervish, Woods Witch of the Wolf's Wood, earthly avatar of Celestial House Scorpio. Cool. Did I do that one right? Sound good?
Perfecto.
Cool, cool. Oh, what are we drawing there, Sanrixian?
Oh,
nice.
You as Pan. I'm working
Nice.
on it.
Okay, we'll come back to this, but it is pleasing to my eye. All right. A fishy rack of ribs. Let's talk about those ribs, shall we? This is the first full rundown on the Grey King and the Sea Dragon from Aaron's The Prophet chapter of A Feast for Crows.
On the crown of the hill, 44 monstrous stone ribs rose from the earth like the trunks of great pale trees. The sight made Aaron's heart beat faster. Naga had been the first sea dragon, the mightiest ever to rise from the waves. She fed on krakens and leviathans and drowned whole islands in her wrath. Yet the Grey King had slain her, and the drowned god had changed her bones to stone, so that men might never cease to wonder at the courage of the first of kings. Naga's ribs became the beams and pillars of his long hall, just as her jaws became his throne. For 1,000 years and 7 he reigned here, Aaron recalled. Here he took his mermaid wife and planned his wars against the storm god. From there he ruled both stone and salt, wearing robes of woven seaweed and a tall pale crown made from Naga's teeth. But that was in the dawn of days, when mighty men still dwelt on earth and sea. The hall had been warmed by Naga's living fire, with the Grey King, which the Grey King had made his thrall. On its walls hung tapestries woven from silver seaweed, most pleasing to the eyes. The Grey King's warriors had feasted on the bounty of the sea at a table in the shape of a great starfish, whilst seated upon thrones carved from mother of pearl. Gone, all the glory gone. Men were smaller now, their lives had grown short. The storm god drowned Naga's living fire after the Grey King's death. The chairs and tapestries had been stolen, the roof and walls had rotted away. Even the Grey King's great throne of fangs had been swallowed by the sea. Only Naga's bones endured, to remind the Ironborn of all the wonder that had been.
Well read, Amanda. Thank you. So before we discuss the ribs themselves, there's a couple of tasty sea dragon as a piece of drowned moon clues that I want to point out. The notion of the Grey King's throne being made from Naga's fangs introduces the idea of furniture made of sea dragon, and the table made in the shape of a starfish and mother of pearl thrones actually play into this idea as well. By now we know what kind of star becomes a fish, of course. That's a moon, which turns into a sea dragon. The mother of pearl thrones suggests the same thing because pearls have always been associated with the moon due to their clear resemblance, and pearls are also found in the ocean, as our sea dragon meteorite was. The point is that all the furniture in this scene, quote unquote, was made of things which symbolize the sea dragon. So now to the important stuff, the bones of the sea dragon. They look like the trunks of great pale trees, you don't say. Most people believe that's exactly what they are, petrified weirwood. They are used in place of beams and pillars, which are things normally made out of wood. And then we're given this exact same analogy by Victarion in the Iron Captain chapter of A Feast for Crows.
The wind was blowing from the north, as the Iron Victory came round the point and entered the holy bay called Naga's Cradle. Victarion joined Newt the Barber at her prow. Ahead loomed the sacred shores of Old Wick and the grassy hill above it, where the ribs of Naga rose from the earth like the trunks of great white trees, as wide around as a drawman's mast, and twice as tall.
It seems that George really wants us to think of those ribs in relation to weirwood trees. Best of all, there's a direct comparison drawn between the sea dragon's ribs, white trees, and the masts of ships, which does a splendid job of firming up our interpretation of the sea dragon boat symbolism in the burning of the Seven scene. Recall that it was the masts of the Targaryen ships that became the burning gods, and so it seems that we are indeed meant to associate the masts of ships with the trunks of trees, or more specifically, burning trees when they're on fire. So, burning trees and burning ships are much the same thing. Masts are made, after all, from the trunks of trees, so it's not really super esoteric here. Now, as an aside, this is a really friggin' big ship that we're talking about if Victarion's estimation of size is anywhere close to accurate. This thing would be like the Ironborn version of Noah's Ark, and that's perhaps exactly what it was. There's yet another thinly veiled reinforcement of the idea that Naga's bones are made of weirwood in the world of ice and fire.
The power wielded by these prophets of the drowned god over the Ironborn should not be underestimated. Only they could summon Kingsmoots, and woe to the man, be he lord or king, who dared defy them. The greatest of the priests was the towering prophet Galen Whitestaff, so called for the tall carved staff he carried everywhere to smite the ungodly. In some tales his staff was made of weirwood, in others from one of Naga's bones.
Muted. Lucifer means mute bringer, is the pun Aziz said earlier.
That one was actually fortuitous because I completely mangled the sentence I was trying to say. It was like the worst one I've done so far. So, how's my pan likeness coming along? Oh, very nice. Yes, somebody was asking for the original picture, but I don't have time to dig that up. Somebody else, Joe Magician, why don't you dig it up? Let's go to my Twitter timeline and then click on the media. You'll see only the pictures I've uploaded. It should come up pretty quick. Although I think Ash posted it, but it'll be on there. Anyways. Sorry, not all about me. Song of Ice and Fire. Yes, that's what you're here for. In any case, Naga's bones and weirwood are interchangeable in this scene. The tall carved staff is either made from Naga's bones or weirwood, or both because they're the same thing. So as for the weirwood turning to stone, we learned from Tito's Blackwood that the maesters say that weirwood trees turn to stone after 1,000 years or so. They apparently never rot. Now, never rotting is a good thing for making boats, but turning to stone is not. So just take that into mind when you make a weirwood boat. It's a limited lifespan, like 500 years or so, which actually isn't bad. Of course, if your boat does turn to stone, you can always make a building out of it, as long as you flip it over before it turns to stone, because then it would be much heavier. But in any case, petrifying pale trees give us pale stone, naturally, which is how Naga's bones are described, as pale stone. And also noteworthy is the fact that weirwood trees are repeatedly referred to as bone white or blood and bone. So the trees are like bones, and the bones are like trees. George has given us a sigil-based hint about all of this too, and that is found in House Stone Tree, who, like House Volmark of the Black Leviathan, does fealty to House Harlaw of the Silver Scythe. The sigil of House Stone Tree is predictably a gray stone tree on a field of black. What is this sigil even supposed to mean? And I'm talking about inside the context of the story, not even symbolic meaning. I mean, there must be some idea about stone trees floating around out there. Stone trees floating around, get it? Anyway, when Asha comes to 10 Towers, the seat of Roderick the Reader Harlaw, she sees the stone tree and the black Leviathan sigils amongst those gathered, which is a nice pairing of sea dragon symbols, ready to serve the Grim Reaper and his moon sickle. The black Leviathan and the stone tree are like parallel symbols, in other words, each representing one aspect of the sea dragon, the black sea dragon meteorite and the petrified stone trees remembered as Naga's bones. I think the evidence here is overwhelming. Naga's ribs are made of petrified weirwood. I used to think about them as a dead weirwood circle, such as we find on a place called Sea Dragon Point, as a matter of fact. But History of Westeros forum user Vaxis, way back in the day, convinced me otherwise with this excellent argument, or with his excellent arguments. And he was pointing to this quote in A Feast for Crows regarding the damp hair.
It was there beneath the arch of Naga's ribs that his drowned men found him, standing tall and stern, with his long black hair blowing in the wind.
I'm just getting a message that Sanri has had some sort of power surge. And she may or may not be back by the end of the episode. So whatever, hopefully everything is fine on your end, Sanri, and we thank you for your drawings. If you didn't get a good look at what Sanri was doing, of course, we will post that on Twitter afterwards. So yes, in any case, we always appreciate Sanri, of course, and hopefully nothing is broken. So these Naga's ribs, they're not just pillars or tree trunks. This is how we know it's not a weirwood circle. They apparently form an arch. This is what would make them look like ribs. If they weren't arched together, they would just look like pillars. The Grey King was said to have built a long hall about her bones, using her ribs as beams and rafters in the World Book, meaning that he built around the skeleton, quote unquote, as is, as opposed to sawing the bones into the boards and beams and then building out of them, which is the image that you get at first. He couldn't have used the ribs as rafters unless they curved together to make a roof. No, I think we definitely are meant to imagine something that really looks like a rib cage, with the keel of the boat being the spine, or more likely the and of course, back up. No, I think we are meant to imagine something that looks like a rib cage, with the keel of the boat representing the spine. So essentially, this is an overturned hull of a boat made from weirwood. That's the theory. As I said at the top, this is exactly what the Grey King was said to have made.
The Grey King also taught men to weave nets and sails and carved the first longship from the hard pale wood of egg, a demonic tree who fed on human flesh.
As I mentioned, the weirwood trees and the green seer bond are heavily based on Yggdrasil and Odin, making this talk of Ig a clear reference to the weirwood, and thus to making a boat of weirwood. The reference to feeding on human flesh would seem to refer to the ancient Northman custom of human sacrifice in front of the heart trees, of course, which again points to Ig as a weirwood. I think it all fits together pretty well. The Grey King was said to have made a boat from weirwood, and there it is, flipped upside down and used for a long haul. It's very utilitarian of the Grey King. Waste not, want not, after all. The next question is where the boat was made. Locally, as the myth implies, or is this the boat of an immigrant people sailing to Westeros? It's certainly big enough to be that sort of ocean-going vessel needed for long-distance sea travel. Perhaps when they arrived, they used the frame of the boat hull for a long haul because it was simply all they had. And here I'll stop and again refer you to The Disputed Lands, who has a great video which goes into even more detail about the weirwood boat theory. What's that one called, Amanda? You're muted.
It's called the Great Naga Debate. And what I do with that video is I go through all three different theories: the sea dragon theory, the weirwood grove theory, and the boat theory.
Yeah, that was nice. I'm always impressed when someone can go back over ground that I've been and find like 3 more clues that I missed. So, Amanda, I am constantly in awe of your prowess. What can I say? As are we all. So, thank you. You're welcome. You deserve it. So, figuring out that Naga's ribs is actually the hull of a giant boat made of weirwood tells us a couple of things. First, it corroborates the legend of the Grey King making weirwood boats, which makes his overall legendary status just a little bit more historical. It opens up the question of foreign immigrants to the Iron Islands, or rather, we should say that it adds fuel to the fire that was already burning. We'll return to the discussion about the possible foreign origins of the ancestors of the Ironborn a different time, but now I want to focus on the other implication of Naga's bones being made of weirwood, and that's the persistent and seemingly inexplicable involvement of weirwood in Ironborn myth. That's right. I mentioned that there are weirwood circles at a place called Sea Dragon Point a moment ago. You know, there's bound to be some good sea dragon clues at a place called Sea Dragon Point, right? To begin with, it has weirwood circles, which makes perfect sense when you figure out that Naga's bones were once weirwood. Then consider the name, Sea Dragon Point. Sea Dragon has a point like a sword, because the Sea Dragon meteor was the sword which plunged into the bowels of the ocean. That's a nice one, right? There's more Sea Dragon Point goodness in Asha's Wayward Bride chapter of A Dance with Dragons, which of course is one of my very favorite chapters, if not my most favorite. And it's there that we'll find our next clues about the mysterious presence of weirwoods in Ironborn myth.
And there's still Sea Dragon Point. If I cannot have my father's kingdom, why not make one of my own? Sea Dragon Point had not always been so thinly peopled as it was now. Old ruins could still be found amongst its hills and bogs, the remains of ancient strongholds of the first men. In the high places, there were weirwood circles.
That's a nasty one.
It is. There were weirwood circles left by the children of the forest.
You are clinging to Sea Dragon Point the way a drowned man clings to a bit of wreckage. What does Sea Dragon have that anyone could ever want? What's there? I'll tell you. Tall pines for building ships.
I'm always in awe of the way that George can write dialogue that works on a plot level, but also just is crammed full of secondary meanings. I mean, this is a great one here. So there's a line about weirwood circles at Sea Dragon Point. Asha is thinking about setting up a new kingdom there, and that makes me think of the first Ironborn who came and set up a new kingdom at a place where the Sea Dragon landed, the Iron Islands. Also found at Sea Dragon Point are tall trees to build ships with. which is a great dragon as a boat clue. Sea dragon as a boat clue, I guess I should say. Christopher Botley says that Asha clings to sea dragon like a drowning man clings to a bit of wreckage, which again suggests the sea dragon as a boat. And in fact, it's the wreckage of a boat. And that reminds us of Theon calling the broken hulls of the boats at Lordsport Leviathans. And one of the primary conclusions to draw from this repeated association between Weirwood and the sea dragon has to do with the hammer of the waters. As I proposed a few times now, the green seers were said to be the ones, I'm sorry, let me back up. That's not my proposition. Okay. One of the primary conclusions to draw from this repeated association between the Weirwood and the sea dragon has to do with the hammer of the waters. The green seers were said to be the ones who called down the hammer, of course. Weirwoods and green seers go hand in hand, so associating Weirwood with the sea dragon makes sense if the sea dragon and the hammer of the waters were both moon meteors, as I propose. To support this idea, I'll return to the Wayward Bride chapter. By the way, Asha herself is the Wayward Bride, as she has fled her arranged marriage to Eric Ironmaker, and the phrase more broadly refers to a moon goddess who has wandered out of course.
She wondered who was in command of her foes. If it were me, I would take the strand and put our longships to the torch before attacking Deepwood. The wolves would not find that easy, though, not without longships of their own. Asha never beached more than half her ships. The other half stood safely off to sea, with orders to raise sails and make for Sea Dragon Point if the Northmen took the strand. Hagen, blow your horn and make the forest shake. Trist, don some mail. It's time you tried out that sweet sword of yours. When she saw how pale he was, she pinched his cheek. Splash some blood upon the moon with me. I promise you a kiss for every kill.
Very nice, very nice. All right, so we've got some ship burning being suggested, which gives us the burning wood / burning sea dragon idea. And then there's talk of the Moon Maiden's fleet descending on Sea Dragon Point, which would represent the fall of the Sea Dragon moon meteors on Naga's cradle. Then comes a rapid-fire sequence of symbolic references. The Sea Dragon, the horn blowing that makes the forest shake. Think of the celestial tree shaking here, as well as the earth as the horn sounds. Then Moon Maiden Asha wants to see Christopher's sweet sword. And finally, there's talk of splashing blood on the moon, amidst some sex and swordplay language, a kiss for every kill. There's also a line from earlier about killing moons and kissing moons at the same time.
Asha took Trist Botley by the ears and kissed him full upon the lips. He was red and breathless by the time she let go. What was that, he said. A kiss, it's called. Drown me for a fool, Trist. I should have remembered. She broke off suddenly. When Trist tried to speak, she shushed him, listening. That's a war horn. Hagen.
This time, Asha the Moon Maiden says, drown me, right after kissing Christopher means Lightbringer. Christopher Botley. And then a horn sounds. The wording is exceedingly clever. The Moon Maiden breaks off suddenly when the horn sounds. The moon breaks off suddenly. I've actually read this passage many times, and I must have read it 10 times before I found that one. But in any case, the allusion to the Carthian lunar origin of dragons myth is pretty clear. The moon wandered too close to the sun, kissed it, and was cracked. When Asha the Wayward Moon Bride is kissed, she breaks off suddenly and commands people to drown her. The symbolic reference to the idea of green seers calling down the hammer of the waters by breaking the moon gets really thick a bit later in this chapter.
Tall soldier pines and gnarled old oaks closed in around them. Deepwood was aptly named. The trees were huge and dark, somehow threatening. Their limbs wove through one another and creaked with every breath of wind, and their higher branches scratched at the face of the moon. The sooner we are out of here, the better I will like it, Asha thought. The trees hate us all, deep in their wooden hearts.
Robar Baratheon's asking, when am I going to get a full back tattoo that has all the Moon Meteor quotes? Yeah, that's a reference to Netflix's Dark, a show that I love. And a character that I love. That's a good villain. Probably never. I'm afraid of pain, Robar. I've got no tattoos for that reason. I'm not nearly as tough as like somebody like Jinx Lier, for example. So, yep, can't deal with it. Can't deal with it. Just, yeah, I'm afraid. Yeah, Dark is awesome. Oh, you're into it too? Ideas of Ice and Fire? Let's stream about Dark, dude. Let's make this happen. Anyways, so just as we saw the spiky iron battlements of the Hammerhorn Keep clawing at the moon, here we have the finger-like tree branches scratching the face of the moon. That's what I call threatening. This chapter is full of personification of trees as human, including the Northmen who actually dress as trees. The trees seem to be whispering to each other in a secret language, Asha thinks to herself. And of course, we know that whispering leaves is the communication of the weirwoods. Later, Asha thinks that the trees will kill us if they can. That's pretty great. They'll kill everyone by scratching the moon and bringing it down. Pardon me. All right, so Asha represents the moon, so it makes sense that the trees have antipathy for both Asha and the moon. Just to be clear, I'm interpreting the personified trees here as green seers, people who have symbiotic relationships with trees. And the clues about them scratching the moon are referring to the idea of green seers bringing down the moon. There's another line about this.
The trees hid the moon and stars from them, and the forest floor beneath their feet was black and treacherous.
The treacherous forest hides the moon and stars because treacherous green seers brought down the hammer of the waters, and the hammer was a moon meteor which brought on the long night. That's my theory anyway. There's a wonderful companion line for this one back in Feast from the damp hair as he calls for the Kingsmoot, an idea he got while listening to the language of Leviathan in the surf.
Seek the hill of Naga and the bones of the Grey King's Hall. For in that holy place, when the moon has drowned and come again, we shall make ourselves a worthy king, a godly king. He raised his bony hands on high again. Listen, listen to the waves. Listen to the God. He is speaking to us, and he says, we shall have no king but from the Kingsmoot.
Listen to the waves! Listen to the God! Sorry, I just had to get that in. But yeah, that's a good one. The moon drowns at the place where the sea dragon died, because the sea dragon was a piece of dead moon drowning in the ocean. What can I say? It's right there. That's when we will make a new godly king, or perhaps a god king is the right expression. That would, of course, be Azor Ahai Reborn, who symbolizes the reborn sun and moon, the child of sun and moon. Azor Ahai Reborn is the drowned moon come again, although, of course, that's the same thing as saying that Azor Ahai Reborn can also be considered Nissa Nissa Reborn. Damp hair may be prophesying the rebirth of Azor Ahai and another moon disaster right here, in other words. Of course, when you say Nissa Nissa Reborn, think of Daenerys, who's kind of Azor Ahai and Nissa Nissa Reborn together. Same idea. That person comes when the moon drowns and comes again. Just love it. Anyways, in support of the connection between Azor Ahai Reborn and a drowned moon, which rises again from the sea, I have found a little noticed line in A Storm of Swords, which I know Amanda is a fan of, which suggests that Azor Ahai Reborn may indeed have some kind of oceanic origin.
His hand swept across the painted table. How many boys dwell in Westeros? How many girls? How many men? How many women? The darkness will devour them all, she says. The night that never ends. She talks of prophecies, a hero reborn in the sea, living dragons hatched from dead stone. She speaks of signs and swears they point to me.
Reborn in the sea, you don't say. Apparently, Stannis has heard a slightly different version of the Azor Ahai Reborn prophecy than we have, presumably from Melisandre. This seems like a total throwaway line when you first read it, as there's no immediately obvious way to connect Azor Ahai with being reborn in the sea. But now that we know that the sea dragon is one aspect of Azor Ahai being reborn, we can connect the idea of the Ironborn bringing the sea dragon's fire out of the ocean with Azor Ahai being reborn in the sea. We can also take that as a further corroboration that the fire of the sea dragon, which the Ironborn possessed, is directly related to Lightbringer and the moon meteors, into the idea that Azor Ahai was reborn as a Merling. Just checking to see if you're paying attention. We'll also mention that Daenerys was reborn in the Dothraki Sea and was, of course, born on Dragonstone, a rock in the middle of the sea associated with dragons. And those of you who are hip to Ravenous Reader's great Under the Sea riddle, which we'll be speaking of soon in the Signs of Portal series, can see yet more layers to this line, but that's getting ahead of ourselves. So after exploring the Weirwood symbolism of the sea dragon, we have several parallels emerging between the Grey King, Azor Ahai, and Green Seers. And they raise some interesting questions. First and foremost, who was it that broke the moon? If the sea dragon was a moon meteor and the Grey King slew the sea dragon, well, doesn't that make the Grey King the moonbreaker? He also called the fire down from heaven in the Storm God's Thunderbolt story, which again puts him in the position of being the moonbreaker. But if the Hammer of the Waters was a moon meteor called down by a group of treacherous Green Seers, well, that makes the Green Seers the moonbreakers. And then there's that guy named Azor Ahai who has a thing or two to say about breaking the moon. What's the deal? I mean, who actually performed this dastardly deed? Well, the point of stealing the moon seems to have been possession of the fire of the gods. And all three of these potential moonbreakers do indeed possess that fire. The Grey King stole the fire of the gods twice over. Azor Ahai stole the fire of the gods in the form of Lightbringer and the Black Meteor. And the burning tree represents a weirwood, whose power also represents the fire of the gods and is possessed by the Green Seers. So how does all this fit together? It's a good question. And one we'll have to answer next week on the follow-up live stream, because there's more to this episode that we haven't gotten to yet. So I guess I'll have to do Grey King and the Sea Dragon A and B or something funky like that. Yeah.
I'll be there.
I'll be there. The next one will be shorter. We'll do the Weirwood Crown and also all the burning sorcerers, and then we'll have a little more time to discuss and roundtable. How about that?
Sounds great. I'll have practice too. I'll have time to practice saying weirwoods.
Wenda the White Fawn runs around in weirwood circles.
Yes.
Anyways, thank you very much for your help today, Amanda. And I'm very much looking forward to Tuesday night, where we can discuss a little bit. I know today was all the scripted stuff, so we didn't really get to chat too much. But of course, I know I will see everyone in the chat on Tuesday night at 6 Eastern. Yes, 6 Eastern?
Yes, 6 Eastern. It's got 3 o'clock your time, 4 o'clock mine. But Eastern, 6 o'clock.
And that is on the Disputed Lands YouTube channel. The thing you need to do, super simple, if you never want to miss live streams from myself or any of the other content creators that you love, you need to do 2 things. 1, subscribe to their channel. And 2, get the YouTube app on your phone, which you probably already have, and make sure that you have notifications set to on. Now, YouTube as an app does not notify you very much. The only time it ever notifies you is when your content creators go live or put out a new video, which is fairly infrequently. So if you do those 2 things, subscribe to my channel, subscribe to Disputed Lands, set your notifications for on. Anytime I go live, you'll know about it. Like the last week, I went live with Aziz when he was in town. No warning whatsoever, just went live. But we had like 100 people within like 20 minutes because a lot of people subscribed and got those notifications and popped right on. So that's what you need to do. Just subscribe to the Disputed Lands if you haven't already. And we'll see you on Tuesday. And if you can't make it, then just check it on the replay. You know how it works. You can send in questions to either me or Amanda on Twitter. It's probably the easy way to do it. And we'll tackle those on Tuesday. We'll talk about some of the stuff we discussed today. We'll focus more specifically on Amanda's essay, but like we were saying, all the stuff is fairly related. So, yeah. And, no, don't send me to tattoo artists. That's not going to happen, guys. I'm seriously afraid of pain and torture. The Ramsey stuff is hard for me. It's tough. It's tough. In any case, I'd also like to thank Sanrixian. Of course, she's telling me actually her entire neighborhood is without power right now. They were struck by the Storm God's Thunderbolt, it would seem.
Oh my gosh.
And they have lost the fire of the gods known as technology. So that one didn't work out so well. But thanks for all of her drawing. And like I said, if you're not on Twitter, you should be on Twitter at Sanrixian, at the Dragon LML, at Crowfood
SD_SD.
SD. And there you go. Yeah, we went too deep. We broke the net. We broke the matrix. But yes,
for the fire of the gods.
Yep. Well, the main thing is sanrixian.com. That is where you can find Sanrixian t-shirts, stickers, prints, all kinds of awesome stuff. And very soon, Lucifer Means Lightbringer t-shirts. Still working on that. So thanks for coming, everyone. Really appreciate all the great attendance. And I look forward to rewatching and checking out the questions. Next week, a week from now, we will again finish this one and have some more discussion. And I'll have Amanda back on and who knows who else. And I'll see you all on Tuesday night on the Disputed Lands channel for Amanda's first live stream ever.
Yay. I'm excited. Thanks for having me on, David. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you for your help. And I'll see you guys next time.